Alright, testing. This is me doing my stream. And about to go. Let's see. Here we go. Alright, hello. I'm here on my third Twitch stream today. And I am making a conlang. That's what I'm doing today. So the first couple streams of this conlang making process did not work out as I planned. So during the first stream, I didn't have VOD archiving on, so the first stream was not recorded either, so it's just lost to time. So yesterday I did a recap of what I did on the first day, and then I did some more work on the conlang, but there was an error that caused the stream audio to loop over itself for the majority of the time that I was speaking, so I wasn't able to really salvage that. It was inaudible, really, for most of the time, so that had to get deleted. But I figured out what was causing the issue, and I hopefully have solved it. So today, I'm going to start just by recapping everything I've done so far and what I'm doing here. And then hopefully have some time to move forward. So I have this agenda over on the side of the sheet, and I have recapping as the first thing. Then I want to talk about ditransitives, how I want to do those, how I want to do cases, and pronouns, and root shape. I don't think I'll get to all of these today, just given how much backtracking I have to do today, but hopefully we can get to some of it. So we'll see about that. So if you're here watching this, thank you for bearing with me. This will seem probably pretty confusing if you didn't see the last two streams, because we're jumping into like the third day of making a conlang. Part of my goal with doing this was to kind of explain my process, so I am going to go over and explain what I've done so far. So the first thing I did was write out what my goals for the conlang are. And I want to use this conlang to take notes on history, anthropology, linguistics, and literature. It's just the kind of stuff I tend to read a lot of, and I want to take some, be able to take notes and just write little reports on stuff to myself to help me remember them. So like sort of a subsection of this goal is like something that would help me remember the information. So I want to get detailed information across in a compact way. So for that reason, I decided that the language is going to be Fusion. I'll talk about features in just a second. I want it to be a tool I can use to demonstrate my conlang process. Just this is sort of a meta goal. It's a little bit harder now that the first few sessions were messed up, but hopefully we can recap everything satisfactorily. And then finally, I want it to be aesthetically pleasing to me, which I've said before is really fickle, because there are a lot of things that I can find aesthetically pleasing in different contexts. It just depends on the combination of what I'm doing and how I'm feeling that day. So this is a lower goal. But I think something that I haven't written here, but it kind of goes with aesthetically pleasing to me, is, I guess, to feel intuitive to me, which is going to kind of be subsections of these goals, mostly this goal here. It needs to kind of gel with the way I tend to think about things, but also be getting across detailed information about what it is that I'm taking notes on at the same time. And that can kind of lead into things that I find aesthetically pleasing because they just gel with how my mind works. So these are my goals. So I'm primarily documenting history and anthropology type subjects. I might dip into like other types of notes I take when I'm like learning stuff, other science topics like biology and stuff that I find interesting. So I do want this to be usable for that kind of thing. But then I have features here, and one of the problems I've had recently with making conlangs and not sticking with them is I usually have a goal of just, I might use it for journaling, or I might, like, it's like a vague goal of what I'm going to use it for, but really the real reason I'm making the language is to test out specific features I find interesting or aesthetically pleasing. And I do that. I make sort of the grammar of the language. I maybe get as far as making vocabulary for it. And then I get bored because I've satisfactorily explored that feature or that aesthetic. And I'm like, okay, cool, I'm done. And I don't stick with it or use it in any meaningful way for very long. And I want to avoid that with this. I want to actually use this language for the goal I have for it. I want this to be the primary goal, which means I'm making choices that I don't tend to make necessarily. I mean, there are some choices I'm making that are pretty textbook for my conlangs, because they kind of go with this sort of idea of making sense in my mind. So there are some things I'm doing that I tend to do a lot, but I also am making some choices that I tend to not to do because I'm putting this sort of goal first above specific features. But I did choose some features that I thought would be useful for some of these other goals. I don't want the language to be minimalistic. I've made a lot of minimalistic languages recently, and while I enjoy them, I don't think it's going to be super useful for this this goal, especially in the getting detailed information across in a compact way. If my, like, say, vocabulary is minimalistic, in order to describe something in a detailed way, I would need to use a lot of words, like combine a lot of simpler words to make a more complex word, and I don't want to have to do this with this language. So minimalism is kind of out, at least extreme minimalism. I still want it to be intuitive to me and not be too difficult to implement when I'm taking notes on something. I also decided I want noun declension. I want to be able to, again, with being compact, I don't want to have to rely too much on prepositions or particles or things like that to get the relationships between words across. I would like to decline my nouns. And it's also been a while since I've made a language with a robust declension system. So from an aesthetic standpoint, I'm kind of feeling noun declensions right now. I want the language to be fusional, and like I said before, that kind of goes with this goal of getting detailed information across. I don't want it to agglutinate. I don't want to have a lot of separate suffixes or prefixes that I have to stack onto each other to get all the information across. I want them to sort of be fused into one prefix that might mean, it's this case, this number, this gender, all in one sort of affix or marking that I put on the word. And then I want easy derivation between parts of speech, because while I want a sizable vocabulary, I don't want it to be minimalistic. I also want to be able to I want to be able to go quickly between, say, having something be a noun and having it be a verb, like the verb of doing or being that noun, or the noun of doing that verb, to be pretty easy. That doesn't mean it has to be zero derivation. I could have suffixes or prefixes, but I want to limit that because I want things to be compact. I want the part of speech to be clear because I want it to be detailed, but I also want it to be compact. So using other strategies to mark whether or not it's, say, a noun or a verb or something like that would be good. For influences, these are just things I'm noting as I'm making decisions on the other sheets thus far. And so I'll get back into like why I put these ones here as I go on to the next page, or the other pages to talk about what I did. So, and these weren't here during the first 2 sessions, so I'm going to come back to these sort of in chronological order of how I made the decision. So this is what I had to start with on the first day, and the first thing I did was talk about nouns, and nouns was about as far as I got the first day. So what I did was I kind of listed different kinds of nouns I'd be talking about a lot in the conlang if I were to be using this for taking notes on history, anthropology, linguistics, and stuff. And I had a lot more than this. I think I had like 20 different categories of like types of nouns I'd be talking about. And then I sort of thought through what would fall into what class, what would tend to go together. Last time I did a full recap of like the whole breadth of these, but instead I just put I have some examples here of sort of like far sides of what this could be. So I ended up, I think the first day I ended up with 12 noun classes, and then I kind of squished it down to 10 last time as I reviewed them again. But first I have concepts, beliefs, values, and traditions. The sort of noun form of verbs would also fall into this category. Verbal nouns would be sort of concepts, like the concept of doing the verb. But these kind of things, beliefs, values, and traditions, these would kind of be grouped together in a sort of anthropology context. So they're all in one sort of class of noun. 2 is phenomena, which is very wide, but anything ranging from emotions to things like natural events, time, like the word for hour could be considered a phenomenon. Sensations, feelings, emotions, all of that kind of get grouped in this category here. There would be probably a lot of overlap between these 2 noun classes, these 2 categories of nouns. So, like I could talk about hour as like a span of time, but I could also talk about it as sort of like a cultural construct by changing the gender. So I would also want the genders to be relatively flexible. Like I could change the gender pretty easily of a word. That makes me think that I want the gender to be explicitly marked somewhere, either on the word itself or on some kind of required marker on it, like an article or something like that. But I also would want it to be able to be changed relatively easy, like easy derivation between these different classes. So I could go on and describe all of these classes of nouns. So I have like a pretty large noun class system. This isn't super large from the standpoint of languages that have noun class systems like this. I'm mostly modeling the way I'm doing this on the way that Bantu languages do noun classes, where they have these sort of like bigger categories. A specific choice that I'm making similar to Bantu languages is having language be considered a tool, and languages in general. At first, on the first day, I actually had language stuff be its own category, but I decided to have it be a tool. I don't want too many noun classes to have to remember the declensions of. And then the other thing I thought about on the first day, and that, by the way, is why Bantu languages ended up in the influences column, just saying like their robust noun class system is sort of the main thing I'm taking inspiration from, although mine is going to work pretty differently. Oh, I ended up dragging this over by mistake. It's going to work pretty differently from the way it works in Bantu languages. So that is the noun class system. Then on the final thing I talked about on the first day was number, and I tested out a bunch of different number systems and kind of thought through what they would look like in all of these classes with all different examples of kinds of nouns that would be in these classes. And I came to a point where it made the most sense intuitively for me to have something like a mass count number system, which I don't think there are any natural languages that have like a purely mass count number system, but I also don't think that's what I exactly have accurately. But basically what I'm going to do is have the default be, depending on what sort of noun class or gender, we could consider these genders, but I prefer the term noun class. Depending on the noun class, we either have it be by default like a mass noun, like say we have food or plant. Let's say we have food and the word is rice. By default, that's mass. And then you add a marking to say that it's count. So like a grain of rice or multiple grains of rice would be marking it this way. Now, how many you have, I think by default, the count will be singular. But you can add numbers to make it plural, or you could specify that it's singular with a number as well. You could add numbers or have some kind of word for many that marks that this is going to be many individuals as opposed to just the whole thing as a mass. And then with more sort of animate type classes like humans, for example, still the default is this one, but it wouldn't really be mass. It would be more like collective, like all members of a group would be sort of the collective. And then the when you mark it for count, you're really marking it for singulative. You're like counting an individual of that group, and you can have many individuals from that group as opposed to the group as a whole. But the group as the whole is the default. And part of the reason I made that decision is that even though it is a little less maybe intuitive for humans than it is for these other classes, where it makes a lot of sense to have the default be collective for foods and substances and abstracts, you don't really need to count those typically. With humans, it might seem a little less intuitive. However, I'm mostly writing about or taking notes on anthropology and history when I'm talking about like sort of overarching movements of culture and different things within a culture overall. So having the default be mass still kind of makes sense even for humans. And so long as the marking for count isn't super complicated or lengthy for especially human nouns, that will still probably be fine. So that is my sort of, those are my decisions I've made on nouns thus far. I'm going to have mass count or collective singulative for number, and I'm going to have 10-ish. I might change my mind and merge some more of these noun classes, but for now, 10 noun classes, which I'm going to want declensions for, so I'll figure that out. I don't think I'm scheduled to do that today. Well, I am going to talk about cases today, but then the next thing I did, which is what I did yesterday, I started with verbs, and I thought through tense, aspect, mood, voice, and evidentiality, and what I wanted. And this is actually a system that has been coming up a lot in different Conline projects for me recently, but it is the one that makes, I think, the most sense for what I'm doing here, which is I have two primary tenses. I have things that happened in the past, which will probably be the majority of what I'm writing about if I'm taking notes on history, and things that aren't in the past. So present, futures will come up pretty rarely, but they might, but they'd use the same tense here, non-past. And then within the past, I'm differentiating perfective versus imperfective. So an event that occurred and then was completed at the time that I'm writing about, and an event that was ongoing or habitual or not seen as complete at the time that it was happening. Here I'm using a past progressive aspect here to talk about, to like sort of demonstrate what this is, but it doesn't have to be was writing. It could be anything from like was writing to used to write or wrote every week or something like that. Anything that would just be like repeated or ongoing as opposed to complete would be an imperfective. So those are sort of my tense and aspects of the tense. Then I have my moods, which are in the columns. And I have just a simple realis-irrealis distinction. I talked about a bunch of different distinctions I could potentially make and thought through how useful they would be. But I ended up just deciding that either the thing happened and there's evidence for it happening, or it's sort of a hypothetical or a for instance or something like that would be irrealis, like it's sort of uncertain that it is or was happening. There's some kind of doubt involved, whether it be hypothetical or just general doubt. And then I have, for voice, I'll talk about voice a bit when I go into syntax. I decided to wait for syntax, and that's kind of what I talked about as well last time. But for finally, evidentiality. I'm doing something a little weird with evidentiality. If I'm saying that something happened or probably happened with my irrealis mood, I want to differentiate how certain of that I am. Not how certain of that I am, really, but like what my source is, what kind of source I have on it. Now, the kind of like philological research I tend to do tends to be working with primary sources. So I've decided to make primary my sort of default evidentiality. This is kind of similar to what Turkic languages do with their directivity marking. They don't quite have like a pure evidentiality system most of the time. Turkic languages tend to have like an indirect and a direct marking. Sometimes they have more. But they are usually like, is the evidence coming directly from the speaker or is it not? And it doesn't really tell you what kind of evidence it was. So I'm doing something similar, except I'm talking about the actual sources, like attestations of sources through like texts or physical evidence, archaeological findings, that kind of thing, because that's the type of thing I'm writing about. So what primary means is it could mean I am the one who's directly experiencing it, especially if I'm writing about the present, or I'm the one finding the historical source, which I'm not an archaeologist, so that's unlikely, but it could happen. Or I am getting the information from a primary source. So a source, so if I'm writing about the past especially, which I'll be mostly doing, my source, if I'm using the primary evidentiality, will be a source that's contemporary with the time period I'm writing about. So if I'm writing about, I'll try to remember the example I gave yesterday. If I'm writing about like French crop tilling practices in the 14th century, if my source is from the 14th century, someone who probably was directly aware of it, of how it was done, then I would mark it as primary. And by marking, I mean I wouldn't mark it. Primary would be my default, my sort of default setting for what I do. I actually didn't talk about markedness very much yesterday with this, and I probably will start with that actually today. I'll probably write that actually here. I'll write that primary is going to be unmarked. And I think perfective past is going to be unmarked as well. I think perfective past is what I'm going to be using, I think, the most. I'm actually not sure about that. I might use imperfective past a lot if I'm talking about like a whole culture or something. Or if I'm talking about a movement in history. So I'm actually not sure about that. No, I think I'm going to use perfective past the most. So that will be unmarked. So secondary will be marked. Secondary evidentiality. So secondary evidentiality will be if I'm getting the information, say about the past or like maybe a present culture or language, if I'm not looking at the language itself or documents in the language or quoting the language, but instead I'm looking at some kind of secondary, another scholar sort of hypothesizing based on evidence they might have but are not sharing with me, a past thing or a present reality, then I'm going to use secondary. And that's why I put it in quotes, just kind of to show that it's not me interacting with a primary source, it's a secondary source interacting with a primary source. And I think the caveat I gave with this, though, is if my way of accessing a primary source is through a secondary source, let's say they quote a primary source, then it would still be primary, because I therefore have access to the primary source. It would just have to be them saying something themselves. Maybe they're paraphrasing a primary source, or they're making a reasonable they're theorizing, and I trust their theorizing, then I might use this. If I don't trust their theorizing, I might go to this. Like, this might have occurred. So these would be marked here. And then non-past and imperfective would be marked as well. So that's kind of what these symbols are. I mean, I never really explained that, but for this, like, slash here, that means it's not marked for me. That's sort of a typical notation for saying that something is unmarked. This sort of tilde here, this little squiggle, that's just me. I'm just kind of using that to tell me that, like, there's going to be something here later. That's not a typical convention. That's just a me thing. That I'm reminding myself that these are going to have special forms. And the reason they're in this matrix like this, I had them listed, like the different features I wanted before, but the reason they're in a matrix like this is because I want fusion. I think I said that on my first page. I want things to be fused together. I don't want, like, say, I don't want, like, maybe a secondary marking and then also a non-pass marking, and to have them sort of combine with each other. So you could maybe imagine I have, like, perfective is unmarked, right? Imperfective, we could say maybe imperfective is like in, maybe it's an in suffix, and non-passed is odd. I don't know, I'm just making this up off the top of my head. And let's say primary is nothing, right? And then secondary is I don't know. And let's say my order goes like aspect, or like, I guess, like tense aspect, kind of combined here. Tense aspect, evidence. If I have, like, if I want to say dubiously, or not dubiously, apparently was writing according to another source, I wouldn't want it to be like write in like stacked like that. Whatever my word for, or root for write is. I'm imagining these are going to be suffixes if I'm doing that. It could be prefixes or infixes or something else. But basically, I don't want this in I want there to be a, you know, a specific imperfective secondary ending that's different from a perfective secondary ending, or a secondary non-past ending. I want them to be distinct and not just like stacking. If they're distinct but shorter, like maybe contained in one syllable, I might be okay with that, but I want as much as I can to have these fused into unique endings. So let's try again. Like, let's say if it were more like E and A, and then I just have M, maybe I could have like write im versus write or something like that to differentiate these two forms from each other. I would be maybe more okay with that, because it's just kind of, it's still kind of compact, but that will depend on how many endings I need and if I can have it be efficient like that. But for now, all I need to know for sure is that I want these things to be the sort of default unmarked forms. All right, so that's verbs. So that's what I established at the beginning of yesterday. I went through all of those different steps of figuring out what I wanted. So I'll actually list again what I talked about. I talked about tense, past, present, future, aspect, how we think about the time, whether it's like ongoing or sort of contained. I talked about other aspects as well, inchoative, cessative, iterative, things you do repeatedly, or frequentative, habitual, something is something you do regularly. Those all go under aspect. Or things like future in the past, or retrospective, something that from this present standpoint you have completed. All that kind of goes under aspect. And I thought about which ones I would want to use, and I ended up just with this simple perfective, imperfective, only in the past, because that's going to be the main thing I'm talking about anyway. And then I thought about mood, which is this sort of question of how many different sort of realities am I going to think about. With realis, it's mostly going to be indicative, things that I'm asserting occur or occurred for real. And then for irrealis, there were lots of different things I talked about. I talked about deontic versus epistemic, things that should be versus things that might be or could be. hypotheticals as opposed to wishes or commands or requests. I'm not going to be doing a lot of commanding or requesting when I'm taking notes on history. I'm mostly just going to be maybe doubting that something happened or postulating that something happened. And I'm fine with those being the same thing. I don't need separate hypothetical as opposed to doubt. Those can all kind of go together. Because the main thing I'm noting is how certain am I of the historical thing, and how do I know? Like, what's my source? So this tells me that I don't necessarily have a source. I'm just kind of postulating. This tells me that someone else has a source, and that I trust them. If I don't trust them, we go back here. But if I trust them, then it would go here. And if I have direct evidence, then it would go here. So that's like sort of the main thing that matters when I'm taking notes on history. At least for me, in this language, that seems intuitive to me. And then finally, voice, we'll talk about on the next page. And then evidentiality is the final thing I thought about. I didn't really talk about mirativity. I might come back to this because I think it could be useful to have a mirative in this language. I'll think about that more because I'm not sure actually how useful it would be. I think it would be adding an unnecessary level of subjectivity to what I'm doing. Mirativity is about how expected something is in the context. So if you're surprised that something is the case, then you might have a mirative marking. Sometimes English uses the adverb apparently in this way. We also sometimes use apparently to mark indirect evidence or non-witness evidence, depending on how we're using it. But basically, for evidentiality, we could say something like, oh, apparently this thing happened. And we're saying apparently because we didn't know it before, but there's sort of like a source that's telling us that. Another source aside from ourselves. But sometimes we use apparently to mark that we're a little surprised that something's the case. It depends on the tone that we give it in English, but mirativity is about sort of how much attention you're calling to something happening because you're kind of surprised that it is the case. Or it's like, it's unexpected. It wasn't what you expected it to be. So that might be useful if I'm taking notes on something, but whether or not something is expected to me isn't super relevant from a scientific standpoint, and since I'm mostly taking notes on history and linguistics, I don't know how beneficial it would be to have a mirative. I can just let myself be re-surprised when I read over my notes again. I don't have to say like, oh, and you found this thing surprising when you first read about it. I don't know how much I need that. At least, how much I need that to be marked grammatically in any way. So that was verbs. Okay, we're going to go on to syntax now. And I spent a good hour yesterday explaining alignment systems. So I talked about transitivity and intransitivity. So this ultimately comes down to the question of valence. How many arguments does a verb need? So typically languages have at least intransitives where the verb requires, someone to do it. So like a verb might like I'm very bad at coming up with examples off the top of my head. Let's see. A verb could be fall. Or, let's make it past tense. Fell. That requires a person who fell, right? Who fell? It fell. I fell. She fell. Fell. But, she didn't fall John, right? She fell John. We could say she felled John, but that would be a different verb. That would be she slew John. That would be different. But fell cannot take a direct object, we would have to say, like, she pushed John down, or she tripped John, or something, to say she caused him to fall. So that would be an example of a causative, where we take something, we take a verb and we say that we cause the verb to happen. And you can do causatives for intransitives, and you can do causatives for transitives. There's not really a limit. Some languages might limit it. And a transitive, that requires a subject and an object. So, for example, slew. We could say slew again. She slew John. Gruesome. We can't just say we might be able to say she slew, but it makes more sense to say she slew someone. How about she maybe she kicked John. We wouldn't really just say she kicked. We might say she kicked around her because she was doing something, like practicing martial arts or something like that. But we might say she kicked the air. We would want there to be some kind of what we call a direct object in English. So I talked about that, and I went at length about different ways that languages treat their arguments that are transitive versus intransitive. If anyone in the chat would like me to go over that again, or if people just let me know that they want me to explain that some more, I can. I don't mind doing that. But what I landed on doing was having this fluid S active stative system. So I'll explain what that means. So I think to explain fluid S active stative, I at least need to explain nominative and accusative first. So in English, we'd say, like, let's have an intransitive and a transitive. And I'm going to use a verb that is ambitransitive. I'm going to use the verb eat. Eat is ambitransitive, meaning it could be transitive or intransitive. We could say I ate, and we could say I ate something, and that would be both would be complete sentences. If I say I ate, that has a little bit of a different meaning than saying I ate something. Like I ate, let's say I ate bread versus I ate. I ate answers the question, did you eat? Like, did you have a meal? And the answer is I ate. Whereas I ate bread answers the question of what did you eat? You ate bread. You could use this as an answer for did you eat? It answers both questions, but this only answers the one question. I might actually also use a different verb. I saw. Let's say I saw her. Saw can also be both. To see, like I see, like I have the ability to use my eyes to see something, versus I saw her, there was a particular person whom I saw. Now, what you'll notice is that I is the same in both of these sentences. I is the subject, and her is the object. If we were to switch who's doing what, it would be she saw, and she saw me. And so what you'll notice is that her is different from she, and I is different from me. I is the subject form, she is the subject form, me is the object form, and her is the object form. Some languages, so actually let me take a step back. Having these two be the same, having the argument, the sort of doer, or the one who is, involved with the intransitive verb, be the same as the one who is involved with the transitive verb, we call this nominative. We'd say that this is the nominative case. It's because the subject is it's the same as the agent, the doer of a transitive verb here. So she saw is the same as she saw me. Now let me change the verbs here for the next example. So let's make it more active. So we have she slept versus she kicked me. Let's add some more violence again, just for fun. She kicked me. She is an agent. She's a doer. She's doing something to me. And I'm saying with the grammar that's kind of the same as just doing a verb to no one. Doing something to nobody is the same as doing something to somebody. And so this special form of like the somebody you're doing something to is called the accusative. So the object form in English would be the accusative case. Other languages might do it a bit differently. There are actually a bunch of ways the languages do this. I went through a bunch of them last time, but the sort of one of the most common other ways to do it is to say that in a sentence like, let's give her a name. Let's say Marta. Marta kicked me. Or, yeah, Marta kicked me. Let's see. Actually, let's give this person a name too, John. Right? So Marta's the agent. Actually, I'm tired of the name John. Let's go with Rolver. Okay. Marta kicked Rolver. This person is the kicky, and Marta is the kicker. So we'd say that Marta's the agent, Rolver is we'll call this person the patient, or in English we would call the object, but they're the patient of the action. Now, with the verb slept, what will happen is, let's have Marta slept. Marta's not really an agent here, just like she wasn't an agent up here. She's the sleeper, but she's not doing something to someone. It's just happening, right? Maybe she went to bed and then started to sleep, but she's not really necessarily causing sleep to happen to her. She's not doing anything actively. It's not necessarily the only option to have these two treated the same. And some languages will actually treat Marta the same as if she were the patient of this verb. So what I mean is, so in English we had those two forms. We had she versus her, and we had I versus me. So if I say she kicked me, let's say I'm over here. To say that she slept, we'd actually say her slept. We would use that same form that we used for the patient here. Don't worry about the order here. What order it's in is not what matters. What matters here is the treatment of the word. So in this instance, with the English examples I'm giving here, the treatment is the different forms of the pronouns here. We have the sort of one form, which is she, and the other, which is her. We have one form, which is I, and the other is me. Where in English, if we have like nominative and accusative, we have I, me, we have she, we have her, we have he, we have him, etc., they, them. Those are the nominative and the accusative forms respectively, because the nominative is what we use when it's the subject, whether it be intransitive or transitive, and then the accusative is the one we use when there's an object. In this type of language, what we have instead is we have what's called an absolutive case. Absolutive is the case that the object gets, the object of a transitive verb, the patient, we would say. And it is also the form that you put the intransitive subject in, because you're not doing something to someone else. So I'm actually going to put this over here. Again, I'm not saying that these languages necessarily change the order. They might, but the order is not what matters. It's the case that we're putting this word in. So her and me are treated the same. They're in the absolutive case. And then what we have instead is a special case for the doer of a transitive verb, which is called the ergative. Ergative because she's urging something to happen. She's kicking me. So she is an ergative. And then we have an absolutive. And the absolutive is usually actually the default one. Ergative. So we'd have like her, me, and then she, I. Now, English doesn't work this way, so it's not what it would be, but we would have sort of a default form that is the same for the absolutive, whether it be transitive or intransitive, and then we'd have a marked form usually for the ergative. So I'm not having necessarily an ergative, absolutive, or a nominative accusative language. What I'm having instead is what's called fluid as active stative. And what this means is that the intransitive verb could do either. So let me explain that a little bit better. I could have a situation where, let's say I have transitive, she kicked me, right? But then I have intransitive. Let's do 2 intransitives. Let's do slept and left. So I could say, actually let's do left first. I could say, she left. So like she got up and went away. She did something of her own volition. She got up and left. So here, what I'm doing is I am treating these 2 arguments the same. So this would be kind of like a nominative case, right? I'm treating these 2 the same. But I could have a different verb like slept, where I instead say slept her, where I'm treating it the same, almost as if I have an absolutive case, because I'm treating these the same. Now, nominative and absolutive languages are a thing, but they're a bit different than what I'm doing here. Nominative absolutive is when you basically have nominative accusative, but the accusative is the unmarked one, and nominative is the marked one. So they wouldn't have these 2 options for intransitive, but this is what it looks like. So what we end up calling these cases in this kind of language, where you can do it either way depending on the verb, is we call this agentive usually, and we call this one patientive, because sometimes the intransitive subject acts like an agent, and sometimes it acts like a patient. And languages that do this are usually called active stative languages, because we're dividing the intransitives into 2 kinds of intransitives. We have more active ones, where the subject is acting as an agent, and we have stative ones, where it's just sort of a state of being that the intransitive subject is in. They're not actively doing anything. And that's why they're called active stative. Sometimes people just call them active languages. Sometimes people just call them stative languages for short. Either name. You'll see either name in the literature. And there are 2 different subtypes of this kind of language. There's fluid S and split S. What fluid... actually, I'll start with split S. Split S means what kind of verb it is will be sort of fixed and tell you what case to use for the intransitive subject. So, say, in a split S language, I might say that slept is stative, but left is active. And so anytime I have the verb to leave, I have to have it be an agentive, and every time I have the verb slept, I'll have it be patientive. So that's split S. It's just sort of, I have to memorize which verbs are which shouldn't be too hard. Usually it's clear from the semantics of like what kind of verbs are, more sort of stative-y and which ones are more active. Tends to be pretty clear. Some languages can do weird things with it, but it's not too difficult. And then the other kind is fluid S, where it's not actually fixed whether you should use an agentive or patientive on an intransitive verb, and instead the choice of one or the other adds a particular sort of nuance to the verb, but the verb is the same. So, for example, I could say with slept, I could have a situation where I could use patientive, or I could use agentive for slept. I could say she slept, agentive, where what I'm saying is she chose to go to sleep. Maybe this would mean like she went to bed and like she got in bed and went to sleep. Like this sleep was intentional. She wanted to do it. She had volition. She had will, and she went to bed and slept. Whereas if I were to say her slept, or slept her, or whatever order I end up putting it in, that would kind of imply that she fell asleep against her will. She slept. She didn't choose to. she fell asleep, or she dozed off, or something like that. So this actually adds a nuance to the meaning of slept, that in a split S language there might just be two different verbs for. I might have like to go to sleep versus to fall asleep, like two different verbs for sleep. Or maybe you just have something like English where we just kind of like have two separate words that indicate that. But what Fluid S allows me to do is just have one word for sleep, but allow the difference in meaning to be made by what case the subject is in. And I really like that option to do that because first of all, it is something that works really intuitively in my brain. It's intuitive for me, and that's one of sort of the things on my goal, implied by my goals, is that I want this to be intuitive for me. I've made a lot of languages that do this, so this is something that's kind of a brand recognition thing for me. I do a lot of Fluid S active stative languages because it just works very neatly. It requires me to have a lot of detail expressed in a small amount of space, while also not having to have too many words for things. I could get this nuance across clearly with the same amount of words, as opposed to having different words or a combination of words or compound to give that nuance there. The other thing is, the other question that kind of comes up is which of these, if either, is unmarked? Is there one that's marked and one not marked with an ending or something? And I decided to have patientive unmarked. And the reason for that is actually voice. So what I talked about is with voice, you could have active and you could have passive, right? Of course, there are other voices. There's like reflexive, middle, etc. But I'm fine with like just merging these other sort of into like stative, because the result is that you end up in a certain state. Maybe reflexive would not be stative, but passive and middle might be stative. I'm not going to go into all those. I explained that yesterday. If people want me to explain that more, they can let me know. I would be happy to. But for now, my point is, when you take something active and make it passive, what you're doing is you are, in English, which is nominative accusative, you are taking the patient, semantically, the thing that is receiving the action of the verb, and making it grammatically the subject of an intransitive verb. And what you do is you take the agent and make it optional and not part of the valence. You make the verb intransitive. So if we say like she kicked me, if I make it passive, it's I was kicked, and it's intransitive now. I could say by her, but that's not required by the sentence, and her would probably be in some other case or marked with a preposition or something. In this language, probably a case. But the point of doing this is there can be two motivations. One could be spotlighting the patient here. You're trying to, you want to make I the subject. Maybe I was kicked by her, then I went to the doctor because she kicked me really hard and it like actually did damage. So to have, if I have I as the subject here, then I can actually get rid of I here. I becomes the syntactic pivot. That's what makes it the subject. I can delete it when I continue to talk more. I could say, I was kicked, then went to the doctor. And it's clear I've deleted the pronoun there, but it's clear who the pronoun is. If I say I was kicked by her, then went to the doctor, there's no world where she is the pronoun. Like, I would have to say I was kicked by her, then she went to the doctor. I'd have to say a pronoun there. Whereas she kicked me, then went to the doctor, that's clearly she who went to the doctor because she is the subject. So it spotlights me and makes me the subject that I can then expand on. So it makes me the topic as well. The other sort of result you can get out of using the passive, and this is one it's frequently used for, is to de-emphasize the agent or get rid of it entirely. I can just say I was kicked. I'm not going to blame someone for it. I'm not saying who did it. I was kicked, and I'm not pointing fingers. So this kind of choice here it's why passive voice is really useful in English. Now, if I can take a transitive verb and make it intransitive, what I can do is I could just, with active stative, I could just get rid of the agent. So if I have agentive marked, let's say I have she agentive kicked me, and me is unmarked patientive. If I want to make that, if I want to highlight myself, if I want to make myself sort of the topic, I could just get rid of her. I could get rid of her, and that instantly makes it have the same meaning as a passive, because if me is patientive, intransitive, this doesn't mean I kicked, necessarily. This doesn't really mean I kicked. It means kicking occurred, and I was the patient of it. I was just sort of like, I passively experienced it. I was in a state of being kicked. To say I kicked, intransitive, like I kicked someone, or just I kicked, wildly in front of me in the air or something, I would have to say I kicked. I would have to use agentive. I would say like me agentive kicked. So it's not ambiguous once I make it intransitive. I'm still the patient here. I'm still marked patientively by not having a marking. It's the agentive that's sort of extra. And what I could also do is so I can easily make transitives and intransitives out of each other, just by having the agentive be the extra thing that's marked that I can get rid of. And if I want to have me be the topic, one thing I was thinking about, and I think I wrote it up here, is I want the topic to come first. If my cases are marked, I actually don't need to have a fixed word order. I prefer to have the verb near the beginning of the sentence in this language. That just feels aesthetically right to me. But I would like to have the topic come before the verb if it wants to. So I could say me kicked she agentive. And that would mean she kicked me, but it would also mean I was kicked by her at the same time. And it doesn't really... it could translate both ways, but the fact that me is first is highlighting that I am the topic. So it could be translated as I was kicked by her. By her is just being marked by the agentive because it's marked, unlike it is in English where you kind of have to go out of your way to make it marked by using the preposition by her. So it's sort of inherently optional, she agentive, which is pretty cool and efficient, in my opinion. So me kicked, I was kicked by her, or she kicked me, but I'm the topic here. So if I said she, so if I went back to this sentence, here, she would be the topic. And then if I didn't really want to highlight either of them, I could say kicked me, she, right? She agentive. And it's unambiguous because she's marked as the agent, so she's the kicker here, or kicked she me. And it means the same thing. So all of these describe the same event happening in this language, but they're putting different emphasis. And what I like about this is it allows me to make emphasis, mark emphasis, without needing extra emphasis markers. I can just use the word order, which to me kind of fits real well with this get detailed information across in a compact way. I don't need special emphatic markers for things, or I don't need a special passive construction to make something be the topic. I could just move it to the front to make it the topic, which I rather like. So that is why I decided to have the fluid S active stative with the agentive being unmarked. So let me go back to what I ended up having here. Let me go back to what I had. I have just sort of the summary here. Transitives can be agentive or patientive. Transitives, there's an agentive, and then there's patientive, and patientive is unmarked. So it's fluid S active stative. And then I have topic verb marked over here. I don't really know where to put that yet. Everything will look all nice and neat once I have more of these decisions made, and I'll make little tables for things like I did with the verbs here. Now, that, I think, is it for the recap. It's been about an hour, but that's fine. I think now that I'm done with the recap, I can go ahead and start with the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is ditransitives. So, what are ditransitives? So, we were just talking about valence. We're talking about transitives and intransitives. Why did I write intransitives? Intransitives, there we go. Intransitives, they require one argument. They require someone who the verb is happening to, or who is doing the verb, and nothing else. Let's see. Sorry, I got distracted by something. Apologies. So, with ditransitives, I skipped over transitives. So yeah, transitives, they just require one argument. And in this language, it could be agentive or patientive, whether it's doing it or it's happening to it. Transitives, require a doer and a doee of some kind. Oh, other thing that I didn't talk about. With transitives, I might have another way to mark transitives that looks a lot more like an intransitive. It's another thing that's kind of a textbook thing I've started to do. Well, not started. I've done it for a long time, actually, now that I think about it. Is that some transitives, I don't want to mark the doer as agentive because they're not semantically agents. So if we go into semantic roles, which we will talk about if we get to cases today, we'll talk about semantic roles. But semantically, verbs, they have valence, which tells you how many arguments they require, whether they require one or two. We'll talk about verbs that require more. That's what ditransitives are. They have a valence. They require a certain number, but they also ask for certain semantic roles of their arguments. So let's talk about the difference between Saul, or actually I'll just say C, C's, versus let's do kicked again. Sure, why not? Okay, let's start with kicked. She kicked him. So kicked, we have kicked. It's transitive here. It's saying that we have a doer, a kicker, and a kick-e. So the kicker is an agent. She's doing something physically with her body that is impacting someone else. She's kicking. And so we have a kick-e who's the patient. They're getting hit. Something is happening to them because of this verb. This person is going from being hit to not being hit. Now let's look at a different example. Let's say they see me. I'll just go with me. Let's just keep doing pronouns just to make it simple. With C, we have a C-er and a C-e, I suppose. And a C-er is doing something, I suppose. They're seeing something. Their eyes are, taking in information. But they're not doing something to someone else in the same way as they were in kicked. And semantically, we would actually not call they an agent. Typically, we'd call they an experiencer. What an experiencer is it's someone who is getting some kind of cognitive input or sensory input from what's happening. So here, with C, the they in question, their eyes are, having the light that's bouncing off of me reflect into their eyes, and their eyes are, taking it in. It's reaching their cones, and their brain is going to parse it. They're not, moving their leg to kick me. They're not moving their eyes to hit me. they are taking in like the information coming from like the light that is bouncing off of me. And in a similar way, I am not actually necessarily impacted by this. Unless I know that they're seeing me, I might get nervous, but without knowing that, I'm just kind of there. And in fact, I am the thing that the light is bouncing off of. So I am what's called usually, if we're going to be very specific, we'd call me a stimulus. I'm the thing that is caused, like, that they're seeing. I'm the thing the light's bouncing off of. Or if we want to go a little bit more less specific, we might just call me a theme. I'm like a thing that exists in the world, but I'm not receiving any action, and I'm not doing anything. I'm just there. I could give more examples of themes if people want to see examples of that. But I'm just kind of there. Kind of like he was kind of there before he got kicked. So I feel like with my language, I would want these to be treated the same. I don't need to mark these specially. I wouldn't say that this is like an agent or anything, so I wouldn't mark that agentively. I'd keep these patientive both, patientive case. But I like to treat these differently, these sort of doers of the verb. With she kicking, she can be agentive. That's like sort of the textbook agentive case. But I would like they to be marked differently. And this sort of thing is called a quirky subject. I might still treat this person as the subject grammatically, like, how if I like continue on, they could still be the subject. If I'm spotlighting them, if not, then I wouldn't. But if I want to say I am seen by them, then they wouldn't probably be the subject. But I like to mark these out separately. So when I talk about cases, if I have a case for things that are like receiving action rather than causing it, then that's the case I would put these in. And Germanic languages, old Germanic languages especially, but I think Icelandic as well, modern Icelandic does this kind of quirky subject thing, dative subject. And some other languages have things like this going on. Impersonal verbs are kind of like this, so we might have verbs like to like. Romance languages do this, where they have the verb to like, and the thing you like is actually the subject. It's the grammatical subject, and often the syntactic subject still as well. And then like the one who likes is actually marked as a dative with a dative pronoun. So like you'll say things like in Italian, you'd say like mi piace. Mi piace. What's something I like? I'm notoriously bad at coming up with example words off the top of my head. Mi piace. I'm just looking around me. I'll just say book, il libro. Il libro. Mi piace il libro. I like the book. The book is the subject here. It's the thing that I like. And me is marked for, this is like a object pronoun. It's an indirect object pronoun. So it's like, literally it's saying the book is pleasing to me. Because the book is just the stimulant. It's the thing that I find pleasing. And then I am just getting the benefit of that pleasure. I'm receiving the pleasure from the book. Wording it that way sounds kind of different than what I mean, but basically it's something that I find it fun and good, and that's why I like it. But in English, we make I the subject. We say I like it. So I am doing something. I'm doing the action of liking to it, but that's not really what's happening. Il libro is just kind of there. It's, in this language, it would be marked patientively, and then I would be in some other case. It would be me. So like I would be saying the book is pleasing, intransitively, maybe, to me. Or it could still be transitive, but with me being marked with some other case. So might as well be intransitive at that point. And then if I wanted to say that someone was actually doing something to please me, then I could do that. So here is a benefit of doing this that I want to explain a little bit. So in English, we can change this dynamic here a bit. We could say something like, they, why is everything like bolded already? They look at me. So this in English is technically intransitive. Look at, look, we have look, and then it's really look at me. Although look is kind of tied to added as a phrasal verb, because at will be sort of stranded at the end of sentences sometimes. But basically me here, it's still like a stimulus or a theme, potentially. Although maybe less so. If I'm aware of it, then I might call myself a patient. My behavior might change knowing that they're looking at me. But that could also be true of seeing, too. But my verb is look. And then I have they. And they here is an agent. Because when you're looking at something, you are intentionally doing it. You are setting your eyes on something. It's a lot more like what's happening here. It's a lot more like kicking someone. You're kicking them with your eyes. You're looking at them. You're paying attention to them. And in this language, I don't need two different words for look and see. I could just say see, but mark it agentive. And now it's clear that they are actively looking at me. They are doing something to me. They're actively doing something, as opposed to they're just taking me in. Like, the light bouncing off of me is going into their eyes, as opposed to they are setting their attention on me. And again, this gets it across very efficiently. You don't need a separate word look. Look and see. The eye is doing the same thing, right? I could just have a word for eye as a verb, with my easy derivation between parts of speech. I could have a word for eye and just make it into a verb to use your eyes. And then have these marked a particular way to clarify whether it's seeing or looking. Just with the grammar of the sentence. This is something I've done before in conlangs. I really like to do it, so I'm doing it now. So the transitives are agentive with an asterisk. And I'll say quirky experiencers. And yes, quirky is, let's say EXP. EXP is the typical abbreviation for experiencer. Quirky is indeed the technical linguistic term for this. The other one is non-nominative subject, which applies if you have a nominative accusative language. I would call this a non-agentive subject, or non-agentive actor. But I think quirky is an easier, more succinct word because it applies to more cases than just nominative accusative languages. And it's more fun to say. Alright, so then we have ditransitives, finally getting to talk about ditransitives. And I think this will probably be the last thing I get to talk about, because this will probably take a while to explain what I want to do with ditransitives. I'm actually not sure what I want to do yet, honestly. There are a lot of different options for what I could do with ditransitives. Okay, what is a ditransitive? Like with transitives, we have, this whole experiencer thing was actually, I just realized, a tangent from me explaining the valency thing here. So transitive is when you require two arguments, and I don't, with this active state, the way I'm doing active stated with patient unmarked, you can say that, transitivity is very fluid with this language, whether or not something is transitive or intransitive. It kind of makes any verb be able to be ambitransitive, as opposed to just some, in most natural languages. There are some transitives, some intransitives, and then a bunch of ambitransitives that kind of change meaning slightly depending on if they're transitive or not. But this language will probably mostly be ambitransitive. But ditransitives, basically, are verbs that require three. So the fact that it's three might make you ask, why is it die and not try? And that's because of the way we've decided to label these, with transitive being the default, intransitive being not transitive, not having to, and ditransitive being having two patients. Because what a transitive means is that you don't just have a subject but have an object. It's sort of biased towards languages that treat their sort of subject the same as their agent a little bit, arguably. But when we're talking about valence, we would call intransitives monovalent, and we call transitive verbs bivalent, and this would be trivalent. So that should be a little clearer. Bivalent verbs, monovalent verbs, trivalent verbs. Ditransitives are trivalent. So here is, let me explain ditransitives a bit. So they're trivalent, so they require three things. What are those three things? Why would you need three? It's not if you have two objects. The thing about transitives is they're not counting how many individuals of the agent or patient you have. They're just counting that you have an agent and a patient. So an agent could be two things. I could say me. I could say like my friend and I saw her. This is still transitive. It's not now ditransitive. Same with like I saw her and my friend. So what's happening instead, this is still transitive, and I could say like she and I slept. This is not transitive all of a sudden because there's two, because we're both just the intransitive subject. The and is just linking multiple people who are having the same, they have like sort of the same role in the sentence. We're just sharing it. There's just multiple of us doing it. But there's not like other sort of roles coming in here. It's not like I'm seeing her, but my friend is doing something else to her. In that case, we would want multiple verbs, typically. So when I say there's three required arguments, I'm not saying like the number three. Like there could be three agents in an intransitive. For example, we could say myself, my brother, and my cousin went to bed, and that would still be intransitive, even though there are three of us, because we're all doing the same thing. We all have the same relationship to the verb. We're all like the doers of that verb. So in a ditransitive, what you end up with most of the time is you have something a little different happening where you have an agent, usually, although I'll put an asterisk here too. You have, and you have your verb, right? The verb doesn't have to come second. I'm just giving an English example. And then you have, you'll have a theme, and you'll have a recipient. Now, theme is not too different from patient. Theme is slightly different. I think I gave that example with the sort of more vague analysis of, like, they look at me or they see me. Me was a theme there. Me was just doing something. Nothing was happening to me, so I'm a theme and not a patient. Themes can be subjects. A lot of verbs have themes as subjects. So, for example, I am tall. I, in that sentence, is a theme. I'm not doing anything. Nothing's happening to me. I'm not an agent. I'm just a theme. I'm there, just chilling as a topic in the sentence. That I'm not necessarily the topic. In English, I'm the topic because I'm the subject, but theme just means I'm just sitting there in relation to the verb. The verb is just describing me. So in see, me, I am seen. That's just, see, I'm just the one who's being seen. I have like this relationship with the verb that's direct, much like a patient does. I'm being kicked here. But here, the difference between patient and theme here is that something's happening to me. I'm like suffering. Whereas with see, nothing's happening to me. I'm just there. It's a minute difference, and most languages don't make a difference between these two. but some do. And the other thing to know is that some subjects can be themes as well, like I am tall, for example. I is a subject, so it's being treated differently. So that's why I'm using the semantic meaning here. But in most languages, this is going to be treated as a patient, but we're going to talk about languages that don't do that. But the theme of a ditransitive is the thing you're doing the verb to, but nothing's happening to it, really. Like, it's not changing as a result of the verb happening. And then we have a recipient. Now, I'm putting an asterisk here, because really what the better terminology for this is a donor. Most ditransitives, almost all ditransitives, are verbs that involve a transfer or a trade or giving of something. So, a textbook, like the textbook ditransitive verb is the verb give. Let's look at English real quick. I give a cake to my sister. Now here we have I is the donor, which isn't too different from being the agent. I'm choosing to do it, so most languages will mark this as an agent, but I'm going to say donor still. Give is my verb, and then the cake is what I'm giving. Nothing's happening to the cake. I mean, it's moving from me to her, like in terms of possession, but it doesn't have to necessarily move. And for that, because that's such a minute distinction, most languages will still have this be treated as a patient, but I'm still going to mark it with a theme here, just for consistency. And then my sister's the recipient. She's the one receiving it. I could also say I baked a cake for my sister. Now here, my sister is not quite a recipient. I haven't given it to her, but she's a beneficiary. Now this is a minute difference, and I doubt that I'll want to make this distinction in this language. It could be worth having, but I'll need to think about that more when I'm talking about case. But in either case, it's ditransitive. And I'll explain how we know that it's ditransitive. The thing you might have noticed is that these are prepositions, technically, so you could say that this is transitive with a prepositional phrase. But we'll talk about why this one, at least, is not transitive. This one could be transitive with a prepositional phrase here, preposition for. But I'll explain why I'm including it here, even though it's not a recipient here. So we'll have donor, and we'll have theme again. The difference is bake is not necessarily a verb of giving. That's the real difference here. She's just getting the benefit. She's who it's for. She's the intention behind making the cake. She's the one who will benefit from the cake having been made. But this verb isn't about me giving it to her, whereas this verb is. Now, what English does, which is a little weird, is this thing called dative shift. So a lot of languages will mark both of these things with a case called dative. From the Latin verb dare, which means to give. Dative. I'm abbreviating it dat because that's usually the abbreviation that linguists use for the dative case. And English has something called dative shift, where you can move the recipient to right after the verb and have no need for the preposition. So I could say, I give my sister a cake. So I is the donor, give is still the verb, my sister is still the recipient, and then the cake is still the theme. They've just switched places, and now my sister is being treated like an object as well. It's kind of like I have two direct objects almost. But it's not like my sister and a cake. I didn't give my sister and a cake. I gave my sister a cake. So they have different roles, but they're grammatically sort of being treated like objects. There's no extra, to here. That's dative shift. And I can do dative shift to verbs that don't have giving involved with them. I could say, I baked my sister a cake. Now, you can't do this with all datives. There are some limitations on it, and I don't want to go into the rules in English because I'm not working with English, really. I'm just giving examples here. But the same thing is happening. The beneficiary is coming first, and then the cake is the theme. Same deal. You're just switching the order. I baked my sister a cake. And it will be the same for pronouns. I baked a cake. I could say I gave a cake to her, and I could say I gave her a cake. I baked a cake for her. I baked her a cake. In both cases, the recipient and the beneficiary are dative. Dative case in a language that would have a dative case, they're treated the same. That's why I was saying I doubt I will necessarily need to treat these differently, because most languages will use the same case if they have a dative case for both. But the difference is the kind of verb. There's a verb of giving and there's not a verb of giving. Now I'm going to explain why in English give is ditransitive, whereas bake is not ditransitive. At least in this sentence where I have the prepositions. I can't say I give a cake and have it be perfectly grammatical. It could be grammatical to some speakers that might not have a problem with me saying I give a cake. But usually there's an implied to someone that's sort of there floating. Maybe if someone asks, what did you give for this, I don't know, fund or don't like drive, like food drive or something, I could say I gave a cake. But I would probably be more likely to say I donate a cake. Donate is not ditransitive, so it doesn't feel as awkward not having the sort of recipient there. I donated a cake. If I say I gave a cake, there's sort of an anticipation in most dialects of English for whom did I give the cake to. So that's what makes give ditransitive. You need both for it to sound complete. Whereas with bake, I can just say I baked a cake and have a period, and there's no need. There's no sort of feeling of absence with not having for my sister there. It's more extra than this to my sister is. It's more optional because the action is about the baking. I'm baking, that's the most important thing. Who it's for is sort of like nice to know. I could even make her the topic. I could say, for my sister, I baked a cake, right? But in English, at least, bake does not require the beneficiary, whereas give really wants there to be a recipient, and that's what makes it ditransitive. Now, English is doing this weird dative shift thing, or it can do this weird dative shift thing, but it doesn't have to. Instead, we use a preposition here, to my sister or for my sister. That is kind of what we would call an indirective language, indirective, where we treat the sister like an indirect object. And a lot of languages that have dative cases will be considered indirective, and they mark the indirect object with a dative case. In Romance languages, there are dative pronouns that get used. And then when it's not a pronoun, you use a preposition like a, or something that means for or to. So that would be indirective. So that's one way of doing it. So in an indirective language, a donor is the agent. A theme is a patient, normal. And then the recipient or beneficiary, if they have ditransitives, if they require that, ditransitive beneficiaries. But usually it's recipient. Recipient is something else, maybe dative or etc. It's different case. With English, we don't use a dative case. We use a preposition. Old English could use the dative case here, usually with a preposition, but the dative case would be used for pronouns, for example. Some languages just do what's called a neutral or double object construction, where the donor is the agent, the theme is the patient, and the recipient is the patient. This is almost what English is kind of doing when we have the dative shift. They're both treated like objects. But the shift happening at all kind of tells us that the dative is kind of weird and its own thing, even though they're marked the same way. Now, English is also kind of working like a secundative language, or secundative, people pronounce it differently, where the donor is the agent, the theme is, so the recipient, actually, no, I'll say, I just noticed I missed the E here. The recipient is treated as the patient, the primary object, and the theme is actually in a special case called the secundative case. So the theme actually gets marked differently. And some people bring up English in this context because the recipient moves to where the object usually would be. I give a cake to my sister. The theme comes after the verb, but I give my sister a cake. My sister comes right after give. So it almost feels like my sister is the main object and cake is kind of being shoved to the side. But they're marked the same, and it's clear when we have a ditransitive in English that we can do that with the recipient. So it's not technically secondative. We don't have a special form that the theme gets. Like, we're not marking cake differently all of a sudden because we're shifting the dative forward. So English isn't secundative, but it's sort of like doing that, except we would have to mark cake differently and specially in a ditransitive for the language to be secundative. I left spaces because I thought I'd be like doing the donor and the agent in different columns or different rows, but I'm deciding not to, so I'm moving those up. Another thing we could do is we could do a split patient, where there are 3 different forms. Like, it's kind of like indirective, but what happens is in transitive sentences, monotransitives, like, we could have some themes be treated in the dative, and some be patientive. I'm not going to go into this because they're kind of weird, and I doubt I'd want that. Now, there's another thing I could do, which is very rare. I think there's only one language that does this. I think it's Tlapanek is what it's called. It's spoken in Mexico. Tlapanek, I think that's what it's called. It's spelled like this. Tlapanek. Tlapanek. Which has something called a pegative case. And what that is that the donor gets marked as pegative. Which is kind of interesting. Yeah, I think that's the only language that does that. I'd have to look that up. But it has this special case for the donor. I don't know what it does with themes and patients, actually. I haven't looked too much into Tlapanek, but I don't know that I would want to mark the donor differently. It's a cool thing, but I don't think I want that in this language. Now, the thing I want to decide with ditransitives is which of these I want to do, because this will have ramifications for my cases, potentially, how many cases I have, which I think is the next thing on the list that I don't know if I'm going to get to tonight. But let's see. I like secundative languages. They're really cool. But I think I don't see any benefit to having it in this conlang. I think it just makes a lot of intuitive sense for me to treat the theme as a patient, especially with the way that patientives are acting as themes in intransitive sentences, and they're like unmarked. And I want it. I think, going back to my goals, I want things to be detailed in a compact way, and I think that rules out the neutral option, because it's not sort of giving me that detail of who's the recipient, who's the theme. I'm kind of relying on some other strategy, and I already know that word order is not the strategy, because I'm leaving word order to be a little bit flexible here. So I can't really rely on word order, and so it leaves too much ambiguity, in my opinion, for this language, and having the theme not be the patient doesn't really gel with what I'm doing with the patient, the patientive case. With intransitives versus transitives, the whole fluid S thing makes me not want to then have the recipient be the thing that's in patientive. And that also doesn't really gel with my idea for the sort of split agent here, where I have the quirky experiencer. I'd like there to be a separate case. So I think indirective, as common as that is what I'm going to do, having the indirective. And so I'm going to have probably, I think the thing that would make the most sense to do is have a dative case. And then I can use the dative for experiencers. So the quirky experiencer is going to be now a dative experiencer. So I know how I'm going to do that now. So ditransitives will be agentive, agentive donor, patientive theme. So T equals patientive, and R equals dative. And that's ditransitives figured out. Excellent. Awesome. Okay. So I can cross this off now. All right, next is cases. I think I have some time to talk about cases. Let's go back to my noun classes. So, to talk about cases, I need to talk about semantic roles a bit. Semantic roles. So, let's think about this a bit. Let's see. How am I going to talk about this? I want to be able to explain this in as succinct a way as possible. Actually, so I am going to need to step out for just a moment. So I am going to be right back. It'll just be probably 1 minute. My dog needs to have dinner, so I need to go feed him for a minute. So be right back. Feeding dog. I'll just leave that up. Sorry, I'm new to streaming, still getting this down. I'm going to make these wider. Oh no, I need to do just the columns. Let's do 300. There we go. Oh, maybe that's too wide. Alright, I will be right back. Thank you, anyone who's bearing with me. I will be just a moment. Alright. Alright, I've returned. I will get a better Be Right Back screen set up soon. I have to learn to do that with OBS. So I haven't done it yet, but I will figure that out soon. For now, I'm just going to call this BRB, in case I need to come back to it. Next in cases, I'm going to talk a bit about semantic roles. And I think how I'm going to do this is I am just going to, I'm going to need to do this over here because I don't want to mess with the size of my columns over there. So I'm just going to go over here and change the column sizes here to probably like 80. There we go. I want more. I want more columns. There we go. That works. Okay. Yeah. Sweet. Okay, so more. That works. Okay. I like to have some space. So, what I'm going to do for the cases, I'm just going to list semantic roles, and then I'll explain what the semantic roles are, so that you know. But for a second here, I'm just going to be writing what might look like gibberish to you. But then I'll explain everything, so don't worry, it'll just take a second. Okay, so I'm going to have agent, donor, force, patient, constructum, destructum. Okay, so these need to be wider. Just go 100. Why not? Okay. Okay, destructum. Let's see. Stimulus. Theme. That's the C. Experiencer. Beneficiary. Recipient. Goal. Purpose. Possessor. Source. Cause. Stimulus. Oh, I already have stimulus, right? Okay. I have stimulus. I don't want to repeat it. Well, actually, it would be good to have it here too. So I'm going to put like stimulus, and if it's here as well, I'll put stimulus as well. Comparison, location, time, concern, path, instrument, manner, measure, function, substitute, partner, associate. Okay. Alright, and I think I need to zoom out here to see all of these, don't I? Yeah, let's go 90, is that enough? No. 75? Not enough. Okay. 50. Oh god. Okay, I hope... No, this is not gonna work. Can you do custom sheets? Should I do like 60 or 70 maybe? 70%. Please say this is enough. No. No. Okay. 65. I'm 2 short. Okay. 60. Okay, I'm going to check OBS to see how horrible this looks. Is this even visible? It does look visible. Okay. I'll zoom in if need be. I would just like to see all of them at once, but okay. So I'll just bold all of them. Maybe that'll help them be more visible. Okay. I don't know. I'll say the name as I'm hovering over it too, so that should help a bit. So this is agent, and we've already talked about what an agent is. It's the doer of something. And we've already decided that the donor and the agent are going to be treated the same. They're both going to be treated as agentive. So this is going to be an agentive case. Okay. There's no pegative to differentiate out the donor. So next we have force. And a force is kind of like an agent, but it's usually something that can't have volition. So a force is something that, like, if I said, like, the volcanic ash crushed my house. Something happened to my house that was done, like my house had something done to it. So we might want there to be an agent there. But the volcanic ash, from the perspective of having a force semantic role, didn't choose to do that. It wasn't like thinking volitionally. So some languages might mark this out as its own thing, force, rather than giving the volcanic ash agency like we do in English. The volcanic ash crushed my house. Well, did it choose to? Not necessarily, but we don't feel the need to mark that it doesn't have volition most of the time because it's clear. I think the existence of my noun classes are going to make it clear that something is a force as opposed to something with will, because I have a special sort of like phenomenon class. So volcanic ash would be marked as a phenomenon and not a person. So I don't need to mark out that I have a special force. And so I'm fine treating that as an agent. What is it? Okay. Then I have my patient. Patient we know is going to be patientive. There are some situations where force could be marked otherwise, like if I want to say because of the volcanic ash, but I'll get to that sort of situation later. What these are marking, I didn't actually explain what I was doing very well, did I? What I listed out were semantic relations. Semantic relations describe the relationship that different arguments in the sentence have to the action of the verb, not grammatically, but not syntactically. I mean, not grammatically, but not syntactically, not in terms of like how they're marked or their order or their place in that whole matrix of morphosyntactic alignment I was talking about before, but they're what they mean for the verb. Like, for example, the agent is the doer of the verb. The donor is the giver in a usually ditransitive verb. So a patient is the recipient of the action that gets affected by the action. That's what these are. These are semantic relations. Relationships things can have to the verb. So that's what I've listed here. Different commonly recognized relations that nouns can have to the verb. There are more, theoretically. There are more minute differences we can make with them. I've actually been pretty minute with some of these because I know I'm not going to make some of these distinctions. But I wanted to highlight them just to be something to think about when you're thinking about how you want to mark different actors in the verb. And case, these things like agentive case, patientive case, dative case, these are how the language treats words in order to get what their semantic relation is across. So verbs will typically ask for particular semantic relations with them. For example, we saw that the verb kick wants an agent and a patient, while see wants a stimulus and an experiencer, while look wants a stimulus and an agent, someone who's more volitional or willing in the verb to do the verb. So the verbs are asking for these. So the verb will often make clear what which one of these more minute things it is. But we use case to say, like, what is it? Which of the things that the verb requires is it? And we're kind of using patientive as the default, so that if the verb is only asking for one thing, it's going to be patientive. And typically the things that it's asking for one of are patient, theme, agent, in which case we'll mark it agentive. We'll actually make that distinction with this language. And there's a few others, like stimulus can often be, yeah, stimulus is here too. There's a reason I put it there, because they're often also patientive. Or they're also, like, what is asked of by an intransitive verb. Of course, there are other things that an intransitive verb might want, and if we make something passive, it could be even more wide. But we're not going to have a passive construction. We're just going to get rid of agents to make things passive, or even not get rid of agents, but change the order to make something do what a passive would do in terms of spotlighting the patient, or the patientive argument. So we don't need to worry too much about that, like those different scenarios that might come up, because we've kind of accounted for that a bit with having a fluid S active state of language. But what I'm doing here is I'm seeing what the sort of default case these relations are going to get, and how many cases I want to have the language mark. I know I'm having like a 0 marking for the patientive and having an agentive marked. I know that much already. And I know I'm going to have a dative somewhere, like some kind of thing that marks recipients down here. Although I don't know what that will be yet, because I haven't decided what cases I want. So that's what I'm doing. I'm looking at semantic relations and deciding how I want to group them into cases. Sorry. One moment, my dog is asking for something, but I don't know what that is. He just really wants attention of some kind. So I will be right back. Give me 1 moment. All right, sorry about that. So, where was I? I was over here in nouns. Okay. Typically I do this in the syntax table, but I'm doing this in nouns because I'm going to decline my nouns for case, and that's why I'm putting it here. So, back to what we were talking about. So patient will be patientive. We know that. Now, what are constructum and destructum? These are actually kind of subcategories of patientive that some languages might mark out to differentiate things rather than using verbs to do so. So a constructum is a patient that is created by the action of the verb. So if I say I baked a cake, I might mark cake as constructum because baking created the cake. The cake is a patient in that it didn't exist before the verb and now it exists. And destructum would be the opposite. So if I demolished the house is a patient. It's a specific kind of patient. It's a destructum. It existed before demolished happened, and now it does not. It is no longer there. So these are these could be useful in a language where, let's say, I have a verb that means like I could. This is tricky. I could have like to pound. And if I'm, I don't know, pounding wheat into flour, I could use the verb pound with a constructum patient to say that I created flour. So I could say like, I pound flour. Pounding creates flour because I've pounded the wheat into flour or something like that. Whereas I could pound a house down or a car and then destroy it. So instead of having maybe crush versus grind or something like that, I could have one verb and what it does, what it causes, would be marked by the case that these are in. I don't know of any languages that actually do this, but these are theoretical, like, patient distinctions, and I think there are some verbs in some languages where they will do this. They will, like, kind of differentiate constructives and destructives. I just can't think of any examples of actual languages that do that. So I thought I just included these there just to explain that, but these are subcategories of patience, so I'm going to treat them as patience. I also think I'm going to treat stimuli, for the most part, as patience. There's a reason I put stimulus down here. I'll explain that when we get to it. I'm going to explain it just so that I can get rid of it, basically. I'll explain why I'm not doing that. And then themes. I think I already said, with, at least with the ditransitives, I said that themes are treated as patientive. But also, a lot of intransitives will take themes, like I gave the example of I am tall. But that would be patientive. That would be a non-agentive intransitive subject. So that would be patientive as well. So that's pretty nice. Then I have possessee, and this one I'm less sure about. So possessee is, like it sounds, it's something that you possess. So if I say something like, I have a horse, horse would be a possessee. It is also kind of a theme. Possessee is kind of a subcategory of theme sometimes. But there are situations where you could have a possessee in another case, also filling another role. It just happens to also be a possessee. The reason I put this as a separate thing is because some languages, rather than marking their possessors, will mark their possessees. These are head marking languages. So they, instead of saying, say, Mark's house, I would say like Mark, and then I'd mark house for like house that is being possessed. Like Mark his house, as opposed to Mark the house. And that would be a possessee marking. However, what I would need to do is somehow mark the case that Mark is in. Using Mark as the name was not a good choice. Let's say Paul's house. I would need to then mark, in most languages, we'd mark Paul to say that he's a possessor, and we'll get to possessors later. We'd mark Paul as a possessor, and then mark house, which is like the main thing. We're just using Paul to describe whose house it is. House is kind of the main thing there. We'd mark house for whatever case it's in. So if I were to say, I destroy the house, I'll also be a destructive impatient. And if I say I destroy Paul's house, Paul would be the possessor, and the house, the possessee, would be a patient. But if I mark possessee, if I mark house as belonging to Paul, then I would need to put the possessor mark on Paul, or the patientive mark on Paul, or I guess the lack of a patientive mark on Paul, which could be confusing. Now, it wouldn't be confusing if it were the patient, because patient is no marking, but it would be confusing if, say, the patient were, or if say, the possessee was the agent. So if I say, like, my mom ate the banana. My mom is the agent choosing to eat the banana. So mom would be marked agentive there, and my would be like the first person. Possessor. She's my mom, not someone else's mom. But if I mark mom for possessee, if I say my mom, the mom who's possessed by me, like she's related to me and not someone else, then I would need to be the one marked as agent. So it sounds like I'm saying I, has a mom, is eating, but I'm not the agent. So that would be kind of strange. Some languages get around this with other means, languages that mark this. They have other ways to do that. But I'm not going to do that. I think I'm just going to treat possessees with whatever case they're in, and mark possessors instead. So I'm just going to get rid of the possessee row. That didn't delete anything, thankfully. Okay, so next is experiencer, and I already know I'm going to treat these as some other case, probably a dative. I'm just writing dative there for now. Actually, I'll do these in capital letters, so maybe they're easier to see. Agentive, patientive. Experiencer is going to be dative. And datives are going to, that we already said in ditransitives, mark recipients. And I don't see a reason to mark beneficiaries a different way, because what kind of verb it is, whether or not it's an inherently ditransitive verb or not, will mark whether or not it's a recipient, maybe. If we're giving something to them versus if they're just getting the benefit of us doing the verb, that will be marked by what verb it is. So I could say I sent my friend money, right? I is the agentive, right? My friend is the recipient, so they'd be marked dative, and money would be the theme marked patientive, or unmarked patientive. Whereas I earned money for my friend, I would be, okay, friend might be a different semantic role we'll get to further down, actually, but let's do a different example. I wrote a song for my friend. There we go. I would be this agentive. Song would be patientive, and then my friend would be dative, but it would be clear that I'm not giving them something, because write is not inherently a verb of giving. So there's no real big ambiguity that I would need to differentiate there. Now, goal. Goal is more of a location, usually, or a place that you are going to. So if I say I am going to the market, market is the goal. And usually we mark goals with prepositions, and they cannot undergo dative shift. They're not dative. We're not giving the market anything. I guess we're giving it our motion, but we're giving the space between us and them our motion, kind of. So goals are usually marked by prepositions in English. The main exception to this is some places we have special words for, like home, for example. I could say I'm going home. Home is the goal. And what we've done is we've made a special adverb of goal for that word. Most of the time we say to. We also have a postposition, like postpositional clitic words, like W-A-R-D with an optional S. So I could say I'm going school words, or I'm going eastwards. We could also just say I'm going east. Directions can be goal with no marking or with postpositions. So we have a couple different ways to mark goal. Now, in a lot of languages, goal is marked the same as recipients, because we can kind of think of the recipients of action as the goal of what we're giving them. So if I say, like, if I give a card to my friend is the goal of that. Like, they're where conceptually the card is going. Even if we're both in the same location and it's just moving from my hand to their hand, there's motion or transfer that is conceptually like movement, even though it might not be. It could just be like, I sent them a text message. Nothing moved, really, but they were the hypothetical, abstract goal of that movement. So a lot of languages will mark goals with dative. Some will actually instead mark goals as the same as patience, but with prepositions. Now, I think I said I wanted cases. Some languages will have a separate case for this. They'll have like an allative case that marks where something is going towards. So they might say allative goal. But I personally, what I tend to do is I tend to have goal be marked by dative as well. And I don't see a reason not to do that here. It's not a big leap to say something was for someone and something was going towards them. And it will usually be clear, again, by the noun class that I have. By what noun class something is, whether or not it's place someone is going, because locations is its whole own class, or a person you were going to, you might have a situation where you're going to someone's house, and you might say, oh, I'm going to, I don't know, to Samantha. And when you say you're going to Samantha, you mean you're going to be near her. Versus, like, I'm giving something to, or you could say, like, you're going for the benefit of someone. That could be ambiguous. Like, I'm going Samantha words versus I'm going for the benefit of Samantha. Those are different things. But when in the former thing, when I'm saying for the benefit of Samantha, I would want to think what that benefit is, because it might fall under another one of these semantic roles down here, which I might talk about later. So I'm going to wait for that. For now, though, I am going to say in general, because locations are marked, I might turn Samantha into a location. I might say, like, Samantha's home. I might take whatever the noun Samantha is in the language and mark it for location. And that would be something like, kind of, something like what French does with the preposition chez, where it means, like, at the home of someone. I'm just doing that by taking the person and making them into a location, like near or around them. So I'm fine just having dative be goal. Now, purpose is a little bit different from goal. They are synonyms in English, kind of, but when you're talking about semantic relations, they mean something slightly different. The purpose is the sort of expected outcome, or it's like the expected outcome of what you are doing. This is usually indicated with like an in order to in English, in order to, or so that. And usually the thing that it takes is a verb, like another verb. There will be like another sentence or clause. When the purpose is not an entire clause, though, we usually use the preposition for. So if my purpose for, I don't know, going to a seminar was to learn, I could say, I went to the seminar to learn. And I might just use the word, I just might put the verb to learn there at the end. I went to the seminar to learn. But I could also say, I went to the seminar for my education, and I use for there, and my education is the purpose. You could say that it's kind of like a beneficiary. If you're personifying my education, they're benefiting from you having gone. And we won't need to worry about personification, because, again, everything will have a noun class that says, like, what kind of noun it is. So I think it's fine even to have a dative mark purpose. And that's what I tend to do with languages, is I have dative mark purpose, because it just kind of goes together with goal. It's sort of an abstract goal. And so if your goal is another verb, verbs that are goals tend to be either, in English, they tend to be non-finite. So, like, I'd say in order to do something. I wouldn't say, I could say so that, and then a person else, like another person, could do something, in which case languages will often mark that second verb as irrealis, and that then marks that it's subordinate to another thing. But there would be nothing there to mark that it's purpose, necessarily. The irrealis can function as a subjunctive there, meaning like it's contingent on the former thing happening, which is a form of irrealis, typically. So I could just say that my irrealis is subjunctive if I have a verb do that, because I know that I don't want prepositions doing this dative thing. I would like to have cases, because I want things to be compact. That's one of my main goals. I could also have the verb be non-finite by having it become an abstract noun, having it be a concept. So I could say, if I want to say, I went to the seminar so that I could learn, I could say, make learn into a abstract noun. I could make it, learning, education, that's a value, a belief, a concept, and then have that marked for dative. where it's my goal is to do that. Now, if it's someone else, if it's a different person who is getting the benefit of this happening. So, for example, if I say, I changed the font so that other people could read it better. There's not really a good way to include other people if who are like the subject of that second verb, could read it better. Could read it better, you could see that that's irrealis. That's like a hypothetical. So the verb would be marked irrealis either way, to show that it's, contingent on the former. But I could also, the way to do it by making the second verb a noun would be to say, I changed the font for better readability. So now readability is a value or a concept that is marked for dative. So I kind of have those two options, and I'm kind of fine having those be the two options because it doesn't seem like it would be ambiguous most of the time, and it's compact. Both are compact, either just making the verb hypothetical because it's contingent on the former thing, or turning the verb into a concept and marking it dative. They both indicate that it's a purpose, and I'm totally fine with that. That seems very efficient to me. Next we have this possessor, and you might see that I have two possessors here. One says possessor AL, and one says possessor IN. I couldn't fit more letters, but if I could, I would say AL and INAL, or alien and inal. What these stand for are alienable and inalienable. So let me explain what a possessor is first. A possessor is the person or thing, but usually a person. Oh, hey, Violet. I see you're in the chat here. Oh, sorry. Give me a second here. Hi. Oh, and hello, big nasty truck. Okay, so I am just explaining here the semantic roles my language is going to have, and how I'm going to express them. So how I'm going to mark them in the language. So first I have, I could go back over these real quick. I have agent, donor, force, and then I have, oh, you have been here. Okay, cool. I just now got the notification, sorry. Cool. Anyways, where was I? So, I was talking about possessor here. The possessor is the person who, person or non-person, who has a thing in the sentence. So usually the thing that they have is the main thing that's going to be involved in the verb. So I could have like, and sorry, I'm super zoomed out here. I'm just trying to see everything at once. I think it's actually probably fine if I zoom in for a bit. There we go. There we go. So, if I have a verb like, she saw, actually, she read his book here. His and book kind of go together. His book is the thing that's being read. So technically it's a stimulus by most analyses. But in this language, I'm just going to mark it as the patient. And by having it be the patient, it's just not going to have a marking. And she, being the reader, because she's putting intention into it, I would probably have her be an agent. If she's just sort of passively looking at the page, though, I might have her be a dative, like, a dative experiencer. Like, she saw his book but wasn't really paying attention to it. Could be. So you could actually kind of show that difference by changing the cases there. That's one option there. The thing that matters here, though, is that his here, his is a possessor of book, but it doesn't have its own sort of role with regards to the verb read. It's sort of just further describing the book. And I decided I wasn't going to have a possessee marking, so his is really describing the book. But these two things, AL and IN here, this alienable and inalienable, these are two different kinds of possession. I could have more, or I could have just one. But alienable means that the possession, well, what alienable and inalienable means actually depends heavily on the language in question. But typically, alienable means that the possessor, the possession in question is separable from the possessor. So the possessor and its relationship to the possession is not sort of inherent. So, for example, his book might be, in a language, might be alienable because he could give the book away, or maybe the book wasn't always his, someone gave it to him, or something like that. Whereas inalienable, more like prototypically, would be something like his arm. You can't really, I mean, you could cut off his arm, but his arm is a part of him. It's like sort of inherently linked to him. Often family members are considered inalienable, like his mom. He might, cut out his mom from his life potentially. They might not be family anymore, but like who he was born from is considered in many languages inalienable. It's like part of who he is. And so some languages will mark these differently. I don't know whether or not I want that in this language. If I have it be sort of loose rather than be like sort of contingent on what noun it is, I could have a situation where his book could have two forms, and the former book is like his book, a book someone gave to him or that he borrowed from the library or something, whereas his book, inalienable, could be something like the book that he wrote and has a very personal, relationship with. It could be his journal or his diary or something. I could do something interesting like that if I had a distinction. But I'm thinking about my goals, and I don't know how much I feel like I need that kind of a distinction in this language. I think I'm fine just having just a single possessor noun. So I'm going to label this possessive for now, PSS for possessive, and just leave it there. I think I'm fine with possessive case. Now we have source. Source is kind of the inverse of goal. Source is where something is coming from. So if I have like I go to the beach is the goal, right? But if I say it like I go from school to the beach is still the goal. From school is now the source of where school is coming from, or where I'm coming from. So source is just marking where the motion, usually it's motion, is coming from. It could also be location. I could say I am from this place, and then this place would be source. There are some more like distinctions I could have put here. I couldn't think of how to label them because I've never seen them in a language marked as a case before, but I could say like time since something happened, so that would be like, I guess, starting point. So I could say I streamed from this time to this time. The from this time, that would be the source, and then to this time would be the goal. It would be like the end point, so I could have like beginning point and end point for instead of source and goal, but I would probably just want to have those be the same. Those beginning point and end point, those times, would be marked for like the phenomenon noun class. So it wouldn't be ambiguous when compared to like a location. So So I don't necessarily feel like I need separate markings for that. I think it's more efficient to just have those be treated the same. So the source would be where something comes from. A cause is kind of like the inverse of purpose. So purpose is like what you hope your outcome is, and cause is the sort of impetus or reason why you did it, which often can be the same, but it's just sort of how you look at it. When purpose is usually, like in English, for example, can express with the in order to, or for the purpose of, or so that. Cause is usually marked with since, or because of, or because, or for, in like the sort of marking sense. I ate this for I was hungry. So cause, with cause, I wonder how I should mark this. Part of the reason I'm like hesitating right now is because with purpose, I could use the irrealis to just indicate that it's subordinate to the previous thing, like it's contingent on it. I don't know if I could do the same thing with source, or with cause, I mean. So source, if I have a source, I would say ablative. Ablative means like coming from, motion from something, ablative. With cause, I could use the strategy. So if I want to, let me like write an example sentence. I might just keep it all in one box this time. I could say, or I could say like she, she walked in order to clear her head. So in order to clear her head here, to clear her head is the purpose. So the two ways I said I could do that were I said, you could say she walked, right? She, agent, walk, verb. And then there are two strategies I could use. I could write clear and have it be irrealis, her head, right? So that like clearing her head is like the sort of hypothetical subordinate action that is the result of her walking. Or I could say she walked, and then I could just make clearing her head a noun somehow. Like I could say for clearing her head. So I could say clear, I could say like clarity, maybe, which would be an abstract concept, and then mark that dative, right? And then clarity of her mind, or, you know, something like that. For clarity of her mind, or for peace of mind, or for clearing as a noun of her mind, or something like that, where her mind would be sort of a possessive, like, whose clarity is it? It's her mind's clarity. So those would be like the strategies for doing a purpose that I could have. Marking the purpose verb as irrealis, or turning the verb into a noun and marking it for dative, which is what I decided to do. With cause, it's a bit different. So I could say like, I could say like she left, or maybe she drank water because she had a headache. Maybe that's something that happened. She drank water because she had a headache. So this is what I want to say with a cause. Because she had a headache, she drank water. I could, let's say I have cause marked ablative. I could turn because she had a headache. I could turn her having a headache into a noun. Like we could do that in English. We could say she drank water because of her headache. I could say she drank water and then we could say her headache, ablative. Her headache is the source of her walking. Basically, it's where her walking is coming from. It's coming from that headache that she has. But we wouldn't be able to do the other strategy, really, because if I said she drank water have Irialis a headache, right? She had a headache, hypothetically. There would be nothing that tells us that this isn't a purpose. She drank water in order to have a headache, hypothetically. That's not what I want it to mean. I want it to mean the opposite. I want it to be in order to get rid of her headache. So we would have to rephrase this entirely and make it into a purpose. We'd have to say she drank water in order to not have a headache. So we'd have to negate and make it Irialis to use this other strategy. And I wonder if I'm okay with that. It's not very compact. I wouldn't be able to really see... I wouldn't be able to do this strategy without also negating the verb somehow with some kind of negative particle. And so I would have to kind of lean more on this strategy of making it into a source noun, which I don't mind making things into source nouns, but I feel kind of boxed in if I have to do that. Another option, of course, is to have a one that I didn't explore here, is, because it feels more compact to not, but I might need to do that here, is to have a conjunction, a subordinating conjunction that means basically because. I could just have a word because that shows that something is the cause. Only when there's like another clause there that I need. I could do that. I could have a because and just not mark cause with a case. Okay, just not mark cause with a case. And instead mark it with a conjunction, or use this strategy. But yeah, so otherwise, so if I'm using the noun strategy, though, it would be basically like a because of, and because of and from would be basically the same thing. I walked from school, I drank water from having a headache. Would be like the same, because of a headache. So that could be fine. And then if I need something more complicated, I might have a not preposition, a conjunction. I could also have a conjunction meaning in order to, or so. I might end up with one anyway for other reasons. So that could be fine, and I wouldn't necessarily have to use this Irialis strategy. I just like using the Irialis strategy. It feels very elegant here for purpose. So, and I don't mind occasionally doing a negated Irialis purpose in order to indicate cause. Like, I'm just trying to think of an example where that wouldn't be the case, where I couldn't do that. So, because of the presence of, I don't know, because of some monarch, these people couldn't exercise their religious freedom or something. For example, if I'm talking about something in history, to mark that, I could go because of this monarch's presence. I could just say because of the monarch. I could say from the monarch and have it be cause, or I could say because of this monarch's policies or something. Or I could have like because of. I could have a because, a conjunction. Or I could change the sort of negation or lack thereof of the entire sentence. I could say these people would be able to practice their religious freedom if it were not for the presence of the monarch, and that would be a negative Irialis. I think I'm okay with that. Alright, that's that explained, hopefully. Okay, now we get to, why do I have a stimulus down here? So some languages might mark the stimulus the same as a cause, because that's like the source of the motion, or the source of the thing. So if I say, I read, or maybe I see the tree, or actually, let's think of a better one. I admire that poet. Poet is the stimulus of my admiration. I am an experiencer, and the poet is a stimulus. And some languages might say, like, the poet is the sort of source, or the stimulus. Well, the poet is the stimulus, but some might sort of, like, group that with source, and then say, like, because of the poet, I feel admiration, or something like that. In which case, then, the poet would be source. But I think I already decided that I want to just keep stimulus with patient, so I'm just going to go ahead and not worry about that. Whoa. And get rid of these parentheses too. Alright, comparison. Comparison is what it sounds like. So compared to my friend, I have a compared to my friend, I have a slower reading word, like, page per minute time, or something like that. So compared to my friend, so my friend could be, like, marked as comparison. Now, or we often use, instead we just use the word than. And the verb is being marked with either more or less there, like with an adverb, meaning more or less. We could also mark adjectives for, like, comparative, superlative, or contrastive, sublative. So, like I said, like, someone is taller than someone else. And there the comparison is not really acting with the verb, it's kind of describing, it's further describing the adjective. It's sort of adverbial there. But in any case, I kind of feel fine doing what a lot of languages do and having this be ablative as well. So saying something like, from my friends, I have, I don't know, or maybe like, from Timothy, Samantha has, I don't know, something. I'm not good at coming up with examples off the top of my head. Let's see. Let's say Jim is taller than Bob. That would be like saying Jim is tall from Bob. Now the issue I'm starting to see, though, is like Jim is tall because of Bob would be the same thing. I doubt that would be a frequent ambiguity, because it seems pretty clear what that would be interpreted as to me. If I said Jim was more tall from Bob, that seems like Bob isn't making Jim taller, especially if Bob isn't marked as an agent. That would be clear. If Bob were causing Jim to be taller, I would probably have Bob be the agent and not the cause. So I think it's fine. I think it's fine, actually. Yeah, I'm fine with that. Location. So, location is what it sounds like. It is where something occurs, where the verb occurs. So, like, I ate in my room would be, the room would be location. So there are different kinds of location you could mark. I didn't put all the different options here. It could be inadhesive, adhesive. It could be like in, on, under, above, between, beside. I could have a bunch of those, and I want to think more about that. But generally, I like to have a locative case to mark this. I do want to explain something real quick, though. So why do I have, like, location a semantic role, but then also location a, like, noun class. Wouldn't that be redundant? And no, it would not be redundant because what location is marking is where the verb is happening, location semantic role, while location, the noun class, is just like what kind of noun it is. So a location noun could have a different role. A location could be a goal. It could be a source. It could be a force, like the location, I could say like a country. Well, actually, no, I wouldn't do that because that would be human collective, actually, if I did that. But I could say like a mountain collapsed in on itself. Let's say that. So, like, if that happened, then the mountain would probably be a patient of an intransitive verb or something. Or the volcano erupted. A volcano might be more of a phenomenon. I'd have to think about that. But if I'm already talking about the volcanoes, if it's a location people might live near or something, and then I wanted to say it erupted, that could be like a force, potentially, in which case I'd mark it agentive, or it could be a patient, depending on how I would want to express that. So a location noun isn't necessarily always going to be the location of the verb. It's just going to be there and taking a case of whatever it is doing in the verb. While location, the semantic role, is just describing what it's doing in the verb. Now, most of the time, the thing that's a location, marked as location in the sentence, would be a location. But it could also not be, depending on what else I include in the with this marking. So, an example of something else that could be a location: a tornado. If you're in the middle of a tornado is a phenomenon, but it would be marked location because that's where you are. You're in the tornado or in a hurricane or something. And it could be abstract as well. I usually group time with location. So during a time is the same as being at a place. In both cases, it's like at or on or in something. I might have more specific things like in a time, under a time. So things like after, before, marking those. That's why I'm putting an asterisk here, because I think I might have more markings, but they might not be cases. I want to have as much compactness as I can, but I don't want to have so many cases that it's impossible to remember how to use them, because I also have 10 noun classes that are each going to have these different forms that I'm going to have to remember. So I don't want an inordinate amount of cases. Concern. Concern is like what you're talking about if your verb is a verb of communication or of information. Most of the time is when these kinds of semantic roles are going to come up. So let's say I was... if you have a verb of communication, sometimes concerns would be marked as if they were themes. So, for example, I discussed John with my friend. John is the concern, so he could just be marked as the theme. He's what the discussion is about. So I could also say like I talked about John, and there I'm marking about with a preposition. So John is still the concern. I'm just using a different verb in English. But in both cases, we could say that John is the concern. This might come up when I'm talking about a value or a concept that is then like being explored by someone in history or whatever the topic is. I feel like a lot of the time, though, like the majority of the time, this isn't going to be distinguished from theme, and therefore, at least when it's a verb of communication, it won't be distinguished from a theme, so it would be marked patientively. But if it's something like, I wrote a book about I wrote a book about candles. Candles is the concern that is describing the book. So their concern is actually like adjectival. It's describing the book. The book is the patient. The concern wouldn't, like if concern was also patient, it would be kind of ambiguous what it was doing there. I wrote a book, candle. I could say I wrote a candle book and just have candle be like just chilling there as a modifier. I could require that all nouns can become adjectives that mean about themselves. That could also be a strategy. But I could also have a concern marking. One thing I do a lot of the time is I have locatives also cover concerns. So it's like on the topic of, I just have the topic be like the place. But that could get ambiguous, because if I'm writing a book about France versus I'm writing a book in France, that could get ambiguous depending on how I'm marking that. So I don't think I want to do that with this language. Some languages might use a different case for it. I could write a book for France, or like to France, if it's about France. I could use a different case for that instead. And I might end up doing that. I might end up using a different case other than locative for the concern, because I kind of do want to mark concern out separately. So I'm going to move on to path and then come back to concern. Path. So path. I am going to explain what path is. Path is how you get from point A to point B. So it's often if path is differentiated from some of these other things, it's often a thing about motion. So we would use path when we use the preposition through. Often that's expressing path. So like, I walked through the hall to get from point A to point B. Path, even in English when we have the preposition through, path is often merged with manner and with instrument. So I'm going to describe both of those too before describing what I do with path. So instrument is like whatever you end up using to accomplish a verb, or whatever someone ends up using to accomplish something. So it could be a tool, like things in the tool noun class would often end up being instruments in a lot of sentences, but not necessarily. Of course, they could be agents and patients and stuff too. But if I say I talked to my friend on the phone is the instrument. That's how I'm talking to my friend. It's not a location. Even though I use the preposition on in English, I'm using on to mark the instrument there, on the phone, by way of the phone. The phone is the instrument of my communication. And you can see how that would often be merged with path too. It's like sort of the conceptual path. How did me talking get to my friend? It got there through the phone. Or I ate with a spoon. Or I ate the soup with a spoon. The spoon is the instrument. It's how I ate. So how did I get the food into my mouth? I used a spoon. So what you use is often going to be the instrument. Manner is the way that you do the verb. So usually we mark manner with adverbs. In what way did you accomplish the verb? So so sometimes we use adverbs with this, and sometimes we use the preposition with. So you can do something with poise. You did it in a poised way, a graceful way. So there, graceful is an adjective describing a way, and way is, I'm using with there. But I could say gracefully and put an adverb marking on that to indicate that it's the manner. So I could take grace and mark it for manner to make it an adverb of how I did it. I like to have these be merged a lot of the time, path, instrument, and manner. Because like, how did you eat your food? In a spoonful way, maybe. That's not really ambiguous. It sounds weird if that's how you do it in English, but it's not ambiguous to eat it in a spoonful way. It could be ambiguous if it's hard to think of situations where it would be ambiguous. That's why I feel comfortable doing it a lot of the time. Now, measure is kind of similar to manner. It's just usually a more, what it sounds like, maybe for what duration you did something, for how long, how wide something is. Usually numbers are going to end up in measure. So if you talked for 3 hours, 3 hours is the measure. Or if this, the tree, or no, not tree, let's say the rock weighed 2 tons. 2 tons is, like, ton, the noun ton, is the measure of how much it weighed. So, measure is kind of like another, it's like a specific quantified sort of companion to manner. At least that's the way I see it. Like, intuitively, I tend to link those two things. Manner is more quality, measure is more quantity. And manner and measure are kind of like paths. So if I say, like, I talked for 3 hours, 3 hours is the measure of how long I talked. It's also how I got from point A to point B. I talked from this time to that time. And so that sort of in-between span, that's where I talked through conceptually. It's sort of like I'm moving through time, and the time in between is my path. So something I tend to do a lot, and I don't mind doing here, is merging all those together into like an instrumental case, or a Vialis case, or a path case or something. What I call it doesn't really matter that much, but there are different nuances. It really depends on the language, but I'm just going to call it instrumental, and just say that, or I think I feel better calling it Vialis, actually, because I'm talking about path and manner and measure there too. So Vialis is like via, by way of, like, how did I do it? Where did I go through? How many hours did I go through? How many pounds did it weigh? How did I do it? Vialis. So I ate it with a spoon. Vialis. What I call it, I'd probably want to have, like, native names for these cases anyway, so it won't really matter that much eventually. Function and substitute. These are kind of similar ideas, but I wanted to talk about them. So function, I think I alluded to it up here when I was talking about, I was alluding to substitute. When I was talking up here about beneficiary, and I said something like, I save money for my friend. My friend is the beneficiary of the money. But if I spend money for my friend is benefiting from me having done it because they probably asked me to do it. But what I'm doing instead, that for there is actually marking substitute. I'm doing something on their behalf. So substitute is when you're doing something for someone else, not doing something and they're going to get a direct benefit from it. Like if I'm baking a cake for someone, the cake is for them, they're going to benefit from that. But you're doing it on their behalf, like in their absence. You are their substitute. So I spoke on behalf of my friend who was absent. On behalf of, so I could say, like, I spoke for my friend. Or people might say, like, don't speak for me, don't speak on my behalf. The me there would be substitute. Function is kind of similar, but function isn't, you're not substituting one, you're acting as a certain, role. That seems kind of tautological because this is a role function, but a social role. For example, like I'm speaking as the president of this club. President of the club is the function that you're speaking as. Like who are you in this context, or what are you in this context, or the fork functions as a tool. So here, function is just telling you what it's doing in the context. So a lot of the time, I just consider function another kind of manner. So if I'm acting as a governor, I'm acting gubernatorially, I'm acting governorly, and I just have that be marked the same way I mark an instrument. And I even feel comfortable doing that with substitute as well. if I'm speaking on behalf of Mark, I'm speaking Mark Lee. I'm speaking Mark Lee. The only problem I might have with this, actually, though, is if I'm speaking on Mark's behalf, that's different from speaking by way of Mark, because that's kind of the opposite. In that case, Mark is speaking through me. So if I were to merge these, I would always want to have it be in the same direction. So like, if I was to have the substitute, I would have it be substitute be the opposite of function. So if I say I speak as president, I would say like I speak president and then Vialis, right? I speak presidently, I speak with president as my power or my role. But if I wanted to say I speak on behalf of Mark, I wouldn't say I speak Mark Vialis, because that sounds more like I speak through Mark, meaning Mark speaks on behalf of me. So what I would do instead is I would actually maybe say I, Vialis, speak Mark, and I'd mark Mark somehow in a different way. What would I mark Mark as? I almost want to say agent, but he's not speaking. That's the whole point. Maybe he's speaking in spirit through me, and I mark it as agentive. Or I could say Mark is, maybe Mark is the source. I'm speaking. If this is the case, there's no actual subject at all. This is, like, it's not just intransitive. It's just there's no patientive. There's no agentive. It's just I don't want Mark to be patientive, and the reason is because this means something like Mark is being said or something like that. Mark is spoken. But I could say something. I could say I speak words, and words would be patientive. So Mark can't. Mark can't be patientive. I speak words on behalf of Mark. I need on behalf of to be expressed with me being marked for the on behalf of, because I'm the tool. I am the substitute. Mark is, I guess, the source. I guess Mark is the source. I could say ablative. But if I don't have words, then it's not even intransitive. It's not monovalent, it's avalent. Which I like avalent verbs a lot, actually. I might talk about avalence at some point. But because avalent verbs can exist. But I think I'll get to that next time when I go back to talking about. I think next time I wanted to talk about additives. That might be talking about pronouns and root shape though, and that might take the whole time. So I'm gonna go ahead and say that. Oh wait, where did I go? Okay, yeah. I'm okay with the substitute being marked Vialis, and then Mark, Mark is the person I am substituting for. I'm kind of fine with him being an agent, though, is the thing. I'm kind of fine with him being agentive instead of ablative. Mark speaking in spirit, because then we still have an agent. Yeah, I like marking Mark as the agent because it tells me what I'm doing in the sentence. Because if I'm doing something agentively on someone's behalf, I would want that to be clear by marking Mark as the agent. Again, maybe I shouldn't choose Mark. Maybe I'll do Sarah. Okay, so Sarah is marked as agent to tell you that I'm speaking, and she's speaking through me. Whereas if I'm, sleeping on someone's behalf, I don't know how that could be possible, but, or maybe I am, let's do something more patientive, like I am, let's say I am punished on someone's behalf, right? Like, punish I Vialis. Then I would want Sarah to be like patientive, to show that I am the patient. So you're not marking the case that I'm actually in on me, you're marking that I'm substituting it on me, and then who I'm substituting for is marked for what they would be experiencing or what they would be doing. I think that works very well, because if I switch this to be a little bit more like intuitive to English, like if I say I'm the agent, I'm speaking on her behalf. If I mark her Vialis, like I said before, that would mean that would kind of mean the opposite. That would mean I am speaking through her, and that therefore she is speaking on my behalf. So even though it seems kind of weird to have me be semantically the agent, but mark her as the agent to show that I'm her substitute, that's basically exactly what a substitute is. She should be the agent. I'm stepping in on her behalf, and I'm marking that with the Vialis. So I think that works actually very elegantly, even if that might not seem super intuitive at first. I think that would make sense to me, enough for me to be able to get used to this. All right, then finally we have these last two, and then we'll come back to concern, I think. We have partner and we have associate. And I'm going to explain both of those. A partner is... okay, how do I explain the difference between partner and associate? I think explaining these is not hard. Explaining the difference is kind of hard. Actually, I'll explain associate first. I think that's easier. An associate is I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this, and I only have a limited amount of time left. An associate could be anyone you're doing something with, or anything that something is happening with. So this is often in English expressed with, and it's different with than this with, like with an instrument. This would be something like I sat with my friends. So my friends are my associates with whom I am sitting. And associates can also be adjectival, like you could have I saw the person with their friends. There with their friends is describing the person. But it's not quite the same because I'm also seeing them, so they are kind of also the stimulus. They're just the stimulus together. So that's associates. It's kind of like saying with. And often languages will mark this like a comitative case if they have that, or they might just merge instrumental and comitative. That's also what a lot of languages do. English kind of does that by having with. We used to not. We used to say, actually, no. English has pretty much always merged them in some way, shape, or form. Then we have partner. Partner is a bit different. Partner is when you want to say that this is when you want to say that they are, usually it goes with an agent, and instead of having multiple agents, like let's say, Sarah and I baked a cake. We're both agents in the baking there. We are both the agent. That's not a question. But if I wanted to say I baked a cake with Sarah, I'm not... So in a lot of languages, I could just say that she's an associate, but in some languages, I might say instead that she's a partner, because she did it with me, and she was just as active in it as I was, but I'm not highlighting her. I'm like putting more emphasis on me. I baked a cake with Sarah. It is different than Sarah and I baked a cake. But it's really hard to explain why this is different from an associate. It's sort of almost like a subset of associate, where the associate is also an agent. In which case, I would probably just not worry about the distinction, at least in this language, and just have them be the same. I don't want to merge these two. I often do that in languages, or I merge. One thing I do a lot, actually, and I might actually consider doing that again, is I have the partner associate be marked with locative. So to say, like, I eat with friends, I make friends the location. I say I eat at friends to say that they're close to me. And I think that's very elegant, honestly, because then I don't need a separate with so-and-so form to mark that they're where I'm at, like they're who I'm with. And to say that we did something together, I don't need a partner role. I could just make them the agent or the patient with me, something like that. So I wonder if I don't just have them be locative. Do I need a separate commentative? Is the difference between saying you do something in the company of someone and you do something located at someone. So, like, I could say I solved a puzzle with Sarah, and so that would be commentative, this one, and then I could say I solved a puzzle near Sarah, like next to her, like she would be the location, but maybe we didn't do it together. That would be the distinction there. But I could make this distinction, so this would be locative and this would be commentative, but I could just not worry about that by saying I and Sarah solved a puzzle. The only difference here, though, the only thing that makes this, like, different, I think, the main difference here, is that it doesn't necessarily mean that we did it together. The commentative marks that we did it together. Whereas if I just say I and Sarah solved a puzzle, maybe them being together implies that we did it together, but it could be that I solved a puzzle and Sarah also solved a puzzle, but she did it on her own. We just had two different puzzles. And so there's nothing telling us whether or not we're together. I could solve this with an adverb that means together. I could just say together, and that gets the commentative across without having a separate case. But that's less compact than having a commentative case. So really it's a question of what's more important here, having fewer cases to remember, or having like allowing the ambiguity and like solving it with something that's less concise, less compact, going back to my goal, compact way, or having the ambiguity, or having more cases to remember. How many cases am I looking at right now so far? I'm looking at like agentive, patientive, dative, possessive, ablative. I didn't talk about merging these because I don't think I'm going to in this language. Actually, I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to come back to the possessive question because I actually might do something tricky with this. It's something I've done before, and I'm actually thinking that might work really well in this language. I just have to think about it. So, we have... I think I'm fine having a commentative. Now, the thing I wanted to come back to with the concern is I think I might have concern be commentative. So that would be saying, I talked... Oh no, that doesn't work. I can't have concern be commentative. That would be very ambiguous. I talked with John. Like, I talked and John talked and we did it together. Versus I talked about John would be the same. But then I wrote a book about France. I wrote a book in France. The way to fix that is to mark whether or not it's an adjective, because that's more of a syntactic ambiguity. Is the book about France or located in France? Or am I writing it while being located in France? And I think... Am I okay with that ambiguity? Or do I need a special concern case? Again, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cases right now. 7 marked, 1 not marked. I spoke about John. I spoke John Lee. I spoke by way of John. John spoke on my behalf. Those would all be the same. I don't want that. I spoke from John, because of John, about John. I spoke in comparison to John. I spoke towards John. Maybe I do need a concern case. Because I'm going to be talking about things a lot. And concerning this topic, blah, 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 blah. It's going to get, a lot of stuff is going to get spotlighted if I'm taking notes on this kind of stuff that I'm going to be using this language for. So maybe it's worth having a concern case. Or maybe this is something I don't mark with case. Maybe concerns are patientive, but there's a special particle that marks them. So they move to become the topic, potentially, or not, before the verb. They don't have a special ending, so they're patientive, but they have a special, I don't know, like little preposition or word, like a word that basically means about. Like on the topic of this, and then the rest of my sentence happens. Or I do blah, 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 blah happens on the topic of this. This is just something that doesn't have a word. Or I mark it the same as the possessive. That's an idea. So it would be like saying, I spoke of John. I spoke John's on the topic of John. Yeah. That'd be kind of like an essive. Not quite like an essive, actually. I'd need to look out Finnish uses the essive some more. But it's kind of like that. Oh, I just remembered something. There is a role I forgot about. I forgot about the part role. Oh, I have mass count. That's not a problem. I'll talk about that when we get to it, but yeah, because I have mass count, I don't have to worry about participes, really. So, concern, maybe I make it possessive. Well, actually, I want to figure out this possessive thing, because if that's what I do, then I'm not going to do the thing I was thinking about. So, one thing I was thinking about, and it's something that I've done in sort of a collab language before, is actually, instead of having a dedicated possessive, what we did was we split the possessive, alienable and inalienable, but we split it between the dative and ablative case. So what that means is to say, like, my hand, or no, let's start with alienable. My pen would be like the pen that's for me, the pen that's to or for me. And then my head, inalienable, hopefully, would be the head to, or the head from me. So the alienable thing, is it something that's like come to you? You have received it, or just, it's yours by happenstance. While if it's inalienable, it's like part of you, it's from you. Another way to mark inalienable, if I wanted to use another case, is I could use locative, like the head on me, as opposed to the pen on me. I could also use locative for the inalienable. There's nothing sort of inherently intuitive about that. It could go either way. But to me, the ablative-dative split seems pretty intuitive to do the alienable and inalienable for. If I split that, and then I don't need a possessive case, I use the ablative or dative adjectively for something. Now, the problem with doing that is then we're back to the what do we do with concern. I guess concern is sort of, that's more alienable. Like, that's not an inherent thing. Like, if I speak about John, John isn't, or if the book is about France, for example, France, the book could be about something else, but it is an inherent quality of the book, so maybe it is inalienable. Maybe I use the ablative for concern. A book from France? That's a problem. Book from France, a book about France. Those being the same. Am I okay with that, actually? That's the thing a lot of languages do. French does that. You'd actually use the same preposition. You'd use the for of, or like from, or about. So I'd be used to doing that. It wouldn't be too strange. I mean, of, it's just of, about, ambiguity kind of thing. I think that's fine. Yeah, I think concern can be ablative. And then I don't even need a possessive. Well, I have two possessives, and they're split between the ablative and dative. I really like that for this language, actually. Because I can say what kind of possession someone had of something. I can say it was for them. It, like, landed in their hands by happenstance, or they owned it. It was part of them. Like, it was inherent to them. So that works. And I think that's all of the semantic roles I want to think about right now. The only other thing was, I just kind of went on a little tangent for a second, was partitive. So a part of something is a part of whole. A lot of languages, if they have like a possessive case, they'll end up with is like a genitive case that also marks partitives. So partitives would be like, you'd have, now, unless we're finished. Finished does some weird things with partitive, but it would be like the difference between saying I or Tim ate some bread versus Tim ate like the bread. Like partitive would be some of the bread, the bread, like all of the bread in question. Bread, just Tim ate bread, or the bread in question. Like just this would be unmarked and this would be partitive. I think though, the way that I have my number system, the bread, all bread in question, or just the concept of bread would be mass, unmarked, and then some bread would be count, like a specific kind of bread, like a piece of bread or some pieces of bread. And if I just mark bread for count, and don't specify how many, then that would be some bread. That would be partitive inherently. So I think I don't need a partitive like case or anything like that. So where are we at? So we have agentive, patientive, dative, ablative, locative, commutative, and vialis. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cases, 6 of which are marked. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say cases, and I'm going to say what the case is and what they do. So I'm going to start with patientive. So patientive, agentive, dative, ablative, locative, commutative, vialis. Yeah. Okay, so patientive is going to mark patience, themes. I don't need to specify constructum and destructum because those are kinds of patience. What else? Stimuli. in agentive, we've got agents, forces, what else was there? Donors, I guess. I just kind of consider donor a subset of agent anyway. Agents and forces, I guess, would be agentive. And then I might also add a note like whom I'm substituting for. But I guess they would still be the agent, not just their substitute. Yeah. I can remember that with Vialis. I'll put a note on Vialis then. Dative. So that would be experiencer. Why are these all plural? Why did I do that? Agent. Force. Experiencer. Beneficiary. Recipient. Goal. Purpose. Ablative. Oh, I forgot. Alienable possessor. Alright, and then we have ablative, source, cause, what else? Comparison? Yeah. Comparison, concern, inalienable possessor. Okay. Then we have locative. Locative is covering location, time. And I might have, maybe I'd use adverbs to specify like things like in, on, under, below. It would just be hard to do that in adjectival phrases. I might need some prepositions or postpositions for that. But a lot of the time it could be left ambiguous, I think. And then commutative. Partner, associate. Yeah, I'll say associate, partner. And then Vialis. I'm going to say, okay, so path, instrument, manner, measure, function, substitute. That's a lot of things, but Vialis tends to cover a lot of things. Okay. Path, instrument, manner, / measure, function, substitute, and I'll put a little asterisk on substitute, and just to remind myself that thing substituted takes agentive or patientive, etc. of role. Alright, I guess takes case of substitutes role. Which is kind of built into the meaning of substitute, but I just want to remind myself that, say, if I'm speaking on behalf of Tristan, I will be marked Vialis, and Tristan will be marked as whatever a speaker would be, so agent in that case. Alright, so there are my 7 cases, and I know that this one is going to be unmarked. So that is excellent. I did cases. Sweet. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this. I'm going to make nice tables about this later. But this is all redundant now, so I'm just going to get rid of all this. Sweet. Okay, so we've got our number, we've got our cases, and we've got our noun classes. So I'm going to need to figure out, so all 10 of these noun classes are going to have all 6 of these sort of mutated forms, like declensions, for these roles, and they will each have 2 of them, one unmarked and one marked. So we'll see how that comes out next time, because there's going to be unmarked mass and then unmarked count. So I think that's all we're going to be able to do for today. It's 6:50 here. So I finished cases. Pronouns. Next time, pronouns, root shape. Maybe I'll get to declension once I figure out root shape. And even conjugation. Oh, no, I can't. I need to talk about pronouns. I need to talk about adjectives. Adverbs kind of, because of marking manner with the Vialis, adverbs are mostly just going to be nouns in the Vialis. Or maybe I could put adjectives as well in the Vialis case if I can mark adjectives for case. Or I could just turn them into nouns and then mark them via Alice, like abstract nouns or something. So adverbs aren't really a problem for me anymore, now that I figured that case thing out. I could have a special adverb case, but I kind of don't want one. So it's really just adjectives, and then I can talk about declension. Because I want to figure out what adjectives are going to do. I have a feeling a lot of adjectives are going to be verbs, stative verbs. So I have an active stative system. I want to exploit that for some nice results. So is there anything I'm forgetting that I want to cover next time? I thought there was like something I talked about with influences. I talked about Tlapanek and its pegative case, but I didn't end up using that, so I'm not going to include that in the influences because I'm not taking from it. I'm going to make these skinnier. I feel like there was somewhere else where I was taking influence. I guess from my other conlangs I've done similar things like this with. Oh yes, my split experiencer quirky thing. I'm definitely being heavily inspired by old Germanic languages in that regard with their quirky subjects. Germanic languages. So I'm going to say dative experiencers. Yeah. All right. So that is all for today. Next time, I think I'm going to start with, actually, I'll do a short recap. Hopefully, sound was good this time, and I'll be able to keep this one up. So I'll have the recap be a bit more concise and just say what the results have been so far. And then I'll go into pronouns, root shape, adjectives, and declension. Hopefully we can get to all that. We'll see. Declension's kind of like the stretch goal there. I'd like to get to adjectives. Actually, adjectives might be kind of a stretch goal. I might spend a lot of time on root shape. So I'll probably be streaming next on either Wednesday or Thursday of next week. It really depends on some stuff. As soon as I know, I will put it all in the schedule. I still haven't updated my schedule yet because I still need to figure that out. But as soon as I know, I will update that on Twitch. But that is all for today. Thank you, anyone who's been watching. Hopefully this was not too confusing. If there's any questions anyone has, feel free to let me know. I can explain some stuff again. I'm always happy to. If you ever want to come back in the chat and let me know if you have questions, I would be very happy to re-explain things. Thank you, and I'm going to end the stream in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.